This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell in a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to gain and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. They'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the Grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, yeah? Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 62. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, it is that time again. It's time to go back to the Grotto of Truth for our sixth.
The Grotto of Truth, yes.
Yep, the Grotto of Truth.
And meet with the acolytes, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, they have their acolyte robes on, and
yes.
I hope they're pretty excited for our sixth installment of the Q&A series in the Grotto Discord. For anybody who doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, that's what we call Discord chat.
Yes.
Yeah. Real heads know, but that's what we're doing today.
Yes.
So we got some good ones this time.
Yeah.
A little less than usual. I think we have 8 questions to go through, but I think some meaty topics, ones that probably going to be spun off into episodes in the future.
Yeah, being that we have a tendency to go so long on these, it's a somewhat welcome reprieve to have fewer questions. But I mean, we always welcome, questions.
Yeah, and for anybody that wants to know how it works, if you want to harass us, if you sign up for our Patreon, the All War Frequency, then you get access to the Grotto Discord. We have a sub chat for questions, and if you ask questions, we will answer them in these episodes.
Yeah, and that's good if you want to harass us or if you just want to nicely correspond with us and the nice community that exists in the Grotto. It's not.
They've all been pretty nice questions so far.
For harassment, no one has harassed us yet, and
no.
Frankly, I would not necessarily encourage it. I don't know. Well, I don't know why you would want to harass us. I think but maybe you're. Yes. Maybe you're Lucian Greaves, but
maybe if you want to take your best shot.
Even if you are Lucian Greaves, we'll answer your question if you post it in the Grotto. But you gotta pony up. Yeah,
you do. Okay, so let's get started. I'll read the first one. This is from our boy Prenti Sound System, and he asks. Xinjiang was touched on a bit in the Victory episode, and I would love to hear the host's take on the current day situation there with the Uyghurs. Which elements of the propaganda emanating from the two great empires do you believe, and which do you discount?
Well, I kind of don't think of myself as believing propaganda either way, so I try to sift through the propaganda to apprehend the situation. I feel like it's not 100% true that the only way to attain any information about the situation is through US propaganda or through Chinese propaganda. I don't feel something that I think one resource that I think is good in terms of getting a picture of the situation is shahit.biz, shahit.biz, which is a database of Uyghurs who have been interned in China based on various different sources. I definitely feel it's a real phenomenon that's definitely happening. Really, I think pretty much like most of what, or everything you could say about Israel, I mean, obviously different situations, but I feel like if you're critical of Israel based on what they've done in Palestine and to Palestinians, like you have to also be critical of China on the same basis. Like people get upset about like the term genocide being thrown around because people think about like the Nazis, and like whether, I think that's like kind of like we can leave that aside. Like I think that there definitely is an attempt to transform a culture that is underway and, you know, to enforce like a kind of conformity, and it's not like good, and the methods that have been used to pursue it have been, you know, definitely questionable. Also, like an aspect where this is sort of used or instrumentalized by various parties, including the U.S. government, against China, you know, and sort of political gamesmanship in like many different ways. But at the same time, like some of like the discourse on Twitter around this, where it's like thread, like why this is all fake, like, you know, and I'm like a 16-year-old, like that like does kind of annoy me a little bit, because I feel like those people like really have not like done like the proper work or really spoken to anyone, like, or when people are like, you know, all Muslim countries, like, you know, like Saudi Arabia doesn't acknowledge it, or like whatever, like wow, like great. Or when like if you talk to like, if you have like any relationship with any Muslim like in your life, like, you know, pretty much it's like widely recognized, like because people actually have relationships with people who are Uyghur, and like, you know, and this is something that's pretty widespread, so people that like know people, have family members, etc. So it's kind of like, and yeah, it's acknowledged, but like the, you know, and the thing of like the idea that like, oh, you know, there's trying to go to war with China, like that's not gonna fucking happen. Like it might be used like to try to push China in one direction or the other, in the same way that China will criticize the U.S. like for its treatment of Black Americans, for instance, but it's not going to be like, you know, we're going to invade China. Like that's just not gonna, like these economies and these countries are so deeply integrated at this point. Like it's a silly idea, and it's like very teenage to me. I don't know. You can say something. I can feel like you're itching to weigh in. Okay.
I got a lot of thoughts about this, and I mean, I think one important thing to say off the bat is I feel like my sort of my perception of this entire situation has, I think, evolved a little bit over the last couple years, because I think when it first came out, my sort of sus CIA propaganda radar just started, you know, screaming basically, with a lot of the like highly dramatized, very like well-funded like New York Times like interactive investigative things, and how I noticed that this figure, Adrian Zenz, this weird German evangelical guy who's made it like his life's work to advocate, to basically do like a Falun Gong, but like for the Uyghur population, ended up being kind of sourced on like everything from like the BBC to like Reuters to the New York Times to Washington Post. Like every time you see an article, it's like, let's talk to Adrian Zenz, this sus guy who said that like he's on a God-ordained mission to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party. And, you know, I think that also, I think the use, like you said, of the word genocide, which still gets bandied about quite a bit, that does irk me, because I feel like that is categorically, I think the very least I can say is that categorically there is not a genocide as we properly understand that term going on in Xinjiang. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that like there's nothing going on and everything is just peaches and amazing, and you know they're being sent to vocational camps, then taught like amazing values so they can go work in factories and, you know, like, you know, out by the coast or whatever. I think that, but I think that saying that it's genocide is that to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that implies that you are killing lots of people almost categorically on the basis of their national or ethnic or religious background, right? Like genocide involves killing people.
When people think of genocide, they think of like gas chambers and Nazi Germany, because that's like the archetypal image of genocide. But I do think there's a little bit of like, you know, again, like it's a very amorphous and very charged term, so it's hard to like, you know, really say. But I do think that even on the left, there, like, people will say, like, you know, Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians. You know, they'll say it's like soft genocide or ethnic cleansing. because like many Palestinians do die like in a systemic way, but obviously don't have gas chambers, not being rounded up or anything like that, you know, at this point in history anyway, you know, so
no, for sure,
like,
but like there is
a good analogy I've seen is the residential school system in Canada for Native Americans. You know, like it's something that on a cultural level that does often have like consequences of people, you know, dying for various, but it's not like a, you know, for instance, like the way the Israelis, you know, Zionists will often point to the like, oh, the Palestinian population has actually grown, so some genocide or whatever. But it's the same type of thing. Like, you know, that obviously these people aren't being exterminated, but like there is an attempt of a cultural kind of purge and to like erase this like identity from
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I did, and that's the area where I think I've evolved on a little bit, because the other thing that really jumped out at me, I remember we used to get in like little fights about this sometimes, because I think like maybe, I don't know, we were both kind of more strident on our like respective positions, but the knowledge, and this is true, that probably up to several thousand Uyghurs were basically navigated their way through, I think in a lot of cases, like Turkish rat lines throughout Central Asia, and then went to Syria and became U.S.-backed rebels. Some of them joined al-Nusra Front. A lot of them joined ISIS. And, you know, there's pretty substantive evidence that happened. And so the fear, I think, you know, going back a few years ago when all this started, was that with the imminent kind of defeat of ISIS, which was mostly caused by Iran and Russia intervening in that conflict, not the U.S., basically that as the assets were kind of like wiped out in Syria and that mission had kind of failed, or they had served their purpose, that there was going to be this influx of like 5,000 to 10,000 Uyghurs who had been indoctrinated, in whatever way you want to call it, by ISIS with the kind of most virulent, aggressive form of, you know, Salafism or whatever you want to call it, that also has like a synergistic effect with kind of like ethnic separatism that has, you know, as we did talk about in the Victory episode, has kind of, you know, been simmering in that region for quite a while. And so there was a lot of fear. I think that to say that the Chinese like were making it up absolutely out of nowhere, that there was, it's just absolutely ridiculous not. That, you know, and there had been terrorist attacks and things like that. So I think if any, it seemed like timed in a way to be like, we're going to cut off at the pass this potential kind of influx of people that have been radicalized and have combat experience and might be sent back by, whether it's by Turkish intelligence or by NATO or something like that, to stir up trouble in this region, which, by the way, this is the other big part of it, and it gets to the critiques about China as well. This is a critical corridor in the Belt and Road Initiative. So basically, they were not only, they didn't just, you know, I think it's safe to say, like, they didn't just spontaneously decide that they wanted to lift up the Uyghur population and, you know, have this influx of economic development. And also, it wasn't just like a purely counterterrorism driven kind of thing, but all these things were kind of intertangled. And basically, I think what they started doing was they employed what seems to be a rather assertive and heavy-handed approach at kind of cultural reform, basically, to cut off at the pass anybody that it seems like is being it's also
too
important.
Religious, yes,
it's also,
it has to do with like. Yeah,
it's also important to point out that it's not a wholesale ban on, like, you can't be Muslim in China anymore. And of course, there are other ethnic groups that are, isn't it the Hui?
Although they faced a little bit of censorship and, like, you know, control of their religious practices as well. The Hui have since this.
Yes,
like,
they have.
On, you know.
And as we talked about in Victory, like, it kind of, there was like this weird kind of dialectic going on between like the Soviet Union when they were around and China of like who treats their Muslim minority population better. And so there were times where China was kind of like easing up and even like, you know, basically like, you know, arming the Mujahideen,
like with the help with the, or like the at the urging or the behest of like William Colby to you know try to subvert the Soviet Union.
Which, you know, we talked about is like a deep irony that now they're turning around. Also, the other thing, this is one of the things that that has not gotten a ton of attention, but it's one of those little factoids that makes you kind of jump up and go a little yikes. And I think it kind of breaks down a lot of the traditional dueling narratives around this whole thing, which is that China had hired, I forget exactly when, but sometime in the last couple of years, they hired Eric Prince on security contracts in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
So the level of ironies there are kind of mind-blowing, because Eric Prince, really cut his teeth in Iraq, both fighting and doing God knows what with the various insurgent groups and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and things like that. There's a lot of whispers and kind of mumblings. I would have to kind of dive in and do more specific research, but I remember there were a lot of like shady allegations that, Eric Prince doesn't just train like badass based hero Navy SEALs or based proxy fighters. He also probably trains like who the people we would call terrorists, who are quote unquote our enemy, as they did in Syria over the last decade, where we just turned on a dime and, from our exoteric opposition to Al-Qaeda, and realized, yeah, but in this country, maybe we should arm them. They're not that bad, right? And so the fact that Eric Prince, who may have had like a direct hand in the protean versions of what would become ISIS in Iraq in the 2000s, is now getting hired by China to protect infrastructure in Xinjiang against basically the modern day iteration of those same like kind of US Contra ISIS fighters that would be coming back. So it's like he's on literally both sides of the game. And then it begs the question about what is China up to these days if they're hiring Eric Prince, and are they really? It kind of really begs the question, because I agree with you. I no longer am convinced at all that I think there's a lot of like geopolitical harassment and trolling going on of China for various reasons. Maybe in the years leading up to 2020, this was meant as a way to kind of like retard the development or frustrate the Belt and Road Initiative. Is if maybe we can get like, we can hype up these claims of, we can use this loaded word genocide and, exaggerate what they're doing, and they are doing something, but like really crank it up to like, oh my God, you can't do business with. And, also, as we see constantly, the US government loves to come up with some humanitarian narrative and then not only slap sanctions on the country that they're targeting, but what I think is even more impactful is say to every other country around the world, well, we've determined that these guys are literally Hitlers, so you can't do business with them either. And so then, if they can get enough juice to kind of do that on a global scale, now China has a lot of juice of its own. So, I think ultimately it seemed like that wasn't enough to get people to stop all these majority Muslim countries from signing agreements to be involved in in the Belt and Road Initiative. But I don't think that I don't think we're going to have. Yeah, but I don't think that we're going to go to war. I don't ever think we're going to go to war over Xinjiang, and I don't think we're going to go over war over Hong Kong or Taiwan. We are deeply integrated with them, and that's the point where I'm at now of a kind of, I still haven't really worked it out. Like, I find the era of kind of from late Mao to like Jiang Xing to the Gang of Four to Deng, and then like moving on to like, today, I find it a really fascinating period. And I think a lot of people maybe are taking a second look at it right now, because the stable categories of like how, say, like an American Marxist or a Western Marxist should deal with China, I've never really felt fully comfortable with like either of those camps. I think a few years ago I was more like, hey, China obviously took a kind of like capitalist road revisionist turn in the 80s, not the greatest thing, but they survived, and they are on track to eclipse America in terms of like political and economic power. And it's like it kind of sucks. It's like the only game in town, really, and it's not quite as they're much more nationalistically minded than even the Soviet Union at like the height of its like revisionist era or whatever. So, it's like, it's not perfect, but if all the NATO countries and all the Western countries are just ganging up on China and trying to do this kind of humanitarian, like, right to protect propaganda shit the way they've done to all these weaker countries, then I'm reflexively going to be, like, against that and want to, like, defend China. But as we see now, I think COVID really threw like a smoke bomb into that whole discourse, because if you're at all skeptical of like the global response to COVID, and it was completely co-signed by China, basically. In fact, they almost set the template for like, this is what you should do if you have a COVID outbreak. Because I'm actually not convinced that it first broke out there. There's like a lot of evidence kind of emerging that it might have been circulating in Europe and even in America in like remember when there was that like vaping disease in the summer of 2019? Where like people are going to there's just
or whatever.
Popcorn lung. Just a lot of like weird shit like that. And then they have found people with antibodies like in like December, like in the water supply in Barcelona, weird shit like that. But anyways, like the fact that China was really kind of in lockstep with the WHO and kind of modeled like, and because we think of them as this like authoritarian country, it almost like I remember a lot of people, like the NPR type voices were almost like a little bit jelly of China for being so authoritarian, because now it's like, why can't we just immediately log everything down and stop this? And so it does feel like we are entangled in like this devilish alliance with them that really started kind of in the late 70s and the early 80s, and there is a kind of like economic mutually assured destruction, almost analogous to like the US and the Soviet Union, like with their ICBMs, where it's like, okay, we both have this immense power, but if one of us tries to like kill the other, like everybody goes down basically. And I don't think there's a way also to like wind back the clock and just like, the Rushites will get mad, but like reindustrialize America. I think it's an interesting idea, but at the same time, like, I don't think you could just like take the industrial capacity of China, just take it back. Like we've crossed that bridge now. We're too far down the road, and in fact, they have such a greater industrial capacity than we do at this point that it wouldn't even make sense. And so we're in a very tough situation with them, where I think the rivalry is getting a little more intense to some degree. And also, like, I think so the thing about Xinjiang that makes me kind of think is like, and some people I don't think like wouldn't like this phrase, but if you think back to like the Cultural Revolution, which was kind of applied to like most of the people in China, maybe more groups more than others, but it's not like the Han population was like exempt from the Cultural Revolution. If anything, like they were hit more directly by it, right? If anything, these peripheral regions were maybe like left out of it because it was considered to like just leave them alone. Like that was the attitude, I would say, more the ambient attitude towards the Xinjiang for like most of China's like communist history, is just like they're out there, like whatever. But now the idea of them sending people to kind of vocational / like cultural re-education camps, it might be one thing if this is like a Maoist thing to like integrate everybody into like a new social society and like purge like capitalist bourgeois thinking or retrograde ideas. Like at least that was like taking a full scale approach to like, oh, we need to exercise this the demons of the capitalist past that still linger. But what they're doing here in terms of taking people who they think are maybe too religious or maybe too nationalist, separatist or whatever, is they're inculcating them with like China's great, and like you should go like move to a factory outside of Shanghai and like work like 50 hours a week and then like make some money, and like, or telling women, there was that kind of cringy thing about like women are no longer baby making it's like okay, like
something to me that's I find very ironic about like all these people like on Twitter with like Stalin avatars who just like whenever anything like this comes up to be like, oh, it's all Adrian Zen's, like, and it just like is a talisman that like turns off their brains and like they can't something that's ironic about that is like that the Soviet Union actually, like, everything that like you would in your darkest fantasies what the CIA is doing with like these like evil like Uyghur insurgents like disrupt China, like the Soviet Union did, like they like actually did, like when there was like a Republic of East Turkestan, like for one period of time, I believe it was called the Republic of East Turkestan.
There was in the 60s, I believe, there was a border dispute.
Yeah, they recently found, like, actually from the 40s, they recently found, like, a Politburo document on Xinjiang where basically they talk about how, like, you know, we helped the Chinese-sponsored governor to fight the Japanese, but, you know, they say, however, the awakening of the ethnic awareness of the minorities of Xinjiang led to a conflict with the governor's desire to provide himself and the clique around him with unlimited power in the province. Not wishing to allow a growth in the influence of ethnic cadre on the broad masses of the population, the governor began to carry out mass arrests and the removal of ethnic minorities from the governing bodies of the province and switched to practice to a policy of colonial repression. Taking into account the growing sympathies of the people toward the Soviet Union, the governor began to wage propaganda that he was supposedly pursuing his policy of repression of non-Chinese minorities with the consent of the Soviet government. At the same time, the governor took hostile positions with respect to the Soviet specialists in Xinjiang. The Soviet government cannot tolerate the provocative activity of the governor, which is hostile to the Soviet Union, and cannot give him aid to pursue his current policy directed at oppressing the ethnic minorities of Xinjiang, and has already been forced to take a number of steps to curtail the work of Soviet organizations in Xinjiang. Based on this, in addition to the adopted decisions previously, they decreed to support the non-Chinese ethnic minorities in their struggle against the repressive colonialist policy of the governor and the Xinjiang government, and the creation of government bodies in districts which are composed of people who enjoy the trust of the local ethnic population. The creation of a Xinjiang National Political Council organized on the basis of appointment by election of its representatives in proportion to the size of the population of each ethnic group. The restoration of ethnic military units, you know, and other things, like including, like, they basically were pressing the sponsor left terrorism button. They even wanted to create illegal groups in the territory of Xinjiang among Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Mongols, and others, composed both local ethnic personnel as well as specially trained personnel from Soviet Central Asian republics. And basically, they gave them, like, direct support in developing, like, you know, guerrilla fighters against the government, like, to, you know, to break away from Chinese control.
It just sounds, it sounds really democratic. Remind me again, like, who was the leader of the Soviet Union when that policy was enacted?
That would be Stalin, and in fact, I think a lot of this was
Stalin. Interesting.
Yes.
Mr. Oh, he hated ethnic minorities so much. Then why did Lenin ask him to write the nationality policy?
Yes.
Interesting. You know, I think that is. I mean, also, you know, I think there's a difference between, like, the Soviets, like, doing that to try to, like, empower the local people, and, like, the CIA just, like, kind of, like, coming in and, like, let's cause trouble, you know, because, like, they don't want anything better for East Turkestan. Like, it's gonna be.
It's obvious that, like, the Soviet Union also had some, like, personal motivations as well. Like, in the same way that the U.S. government will, like, put it in, like, language of, like, human rights or whatever, you know, they dress it up in certain ways, you know. I think that, like, they were saying, like,
but
well,
that was also
us, etc.
That was also before Mao, like, won the Civil War. So I think those were contested areas. So even though that guy might have been a communist, I think there was still, you know, there's a lot of, like, popular frontism going on with on the Chinese situation. So so I think that's probably something they didn't pursue that from, like, Mao winning to basically the Sino-Soviet split. I don't think they tried anything, but then after the Sino-Soviet split, they had some disputes in the 60s. Over the kind of Xinjiang, East Turkestan kind of area.
Yeah, maybe there was a lull, like, in there when they had relatively good relations with Mao, but I do think that there was a lot of activity beyond just that. I'm not sure if, you know, if they were delayed until the 60s, but, you know, even, you know, the East Turkestan movement, which is something that they, you know, people say, like, oh my god, like, that's separatism. Anyone, like, refers, like, that's kind of something that was, like, Soviet sponsored. Like, you know, they, like,
I mean, I don't think it means that, like, if you're you know, a Soviet supporter or Marxist, like, today, then you must support, like, the CIA's ops to, like, destabilize the region.
Right, of course. No, I'm just saying that, like, the, you know, the idea that, like, this is, like, a fundamentally reactionary element that, like, you know, and China is, like, fundamentally, like, socialist. Like, obviously this is not something that, like, the Soviets perceived as being true, that, like,
well,
you know,
I think also, I think you would have to look at the character of, like, groups like the World Uyghur Congress and people like that who are very NED, like, basically color revolutioned up these days, and maybe the composition of like whatever the ethnic guerrillas were back in like the 1940s. But still, I would err on the side more of, I would agree with you that just assuming that China is like doing the good socialist thing and anybody that doesn't like it is just being a reactionary or is like a foreign puppet or something like that, I wouldn't jump to that conclusion anymore, because I'm not sure. I think China is pursuing something that it perceives to be pragmatic, and it is heavy-handed in like definitely some ways, and it's not like, as I've discussed I think on the last Q&A, that like the antagonism towards religion and the religious, I feel like is the greatest flaw of like 20th century Marxism, or is like the greatest misstep, because what does it really get you at the end of the day besides a ton of resentment? And I don't know, it seems like it's always like a losing strategy to go for that level of kind of like social control or conditioning or whatever. I mean, as we said, like Stalin kind of rehabilitated like most of the religions in the Soviet Union like during World War II, because it was just like, we can't afford to just like keep dunking on like religious people when we need like our priests to like encourage people to go join the Red Army and shit. You know what I mean? Like, this is really something that's like not necessary. Like, we can actually just like bring back. I was reading a communique the other day from the Polish ambassador during World War II, and he was speaking very glowingly about like the exile Polish army in the Soviet Union and how they had already given them full religious freedom and assigned them like Catholic chaplains, and how pleased everybody was. I'm just like, oh yeah, sounds so authoritarian. You know, but I think that, yeah, I think going after people's religious beliefs, and also it opens the door for then the CIA to worm its way in with people that maybe rightfully feel persecuted for their religion, and then start distributing the fraudulent version of Islam that they've been sponsoring for 40 years to actually try to get some people to, you know, basically blow some shit up or do a knife attack.
Has been like very extreme, like, you know, people who are like people who fast or like have beards or whatever, or discourage drinking alcohol, you know, that's like seen as like infection with China, like, you know, with religious extremism or whatever, like, you know, that's, you know, pretty intense. Like,
maybe they shouldn't have teamed up with Saudi Arabia in the 80s. That was, you know.
Well, they did, they teamed up. With
I mean, that's what you get. That, like, that is kind of what you get China for, like, deciding with all the global reactionaries who were, like, pushing this type of religion, that, like, now you're shocked that it like maybe is like seeping into one of your provinces. Like, you know, you guys could have maybe you know, helped put a kibosh on this back in the 80s, but just had to get back at the Soviets, didn't you?
There's actually a series of letters back and forth between Stalin and Alekhan Touré, who I guess was you know, one of the leaders of the Second East Turkestan Republic. Very positive, you know, very pleasant correspondence. But yeah, I think that he was mostly a fighter against Chinese nationalists. So, you know, not really neither here nor there, but you know, just interesting.
Yeah. But,
fact.
you know, it's Wilderness of Mirrors, and okay. So that was already pretty hot. But do you want to read number 2?
All right, yeah. Jimmy Falun Gong asks, I would like to know each of the hosts' hottest takes, if that they feel comfortable sharing, as gauged by the most consistent pushback they get, serious or not.
No, what do you think?
Know. Well, I mean, I have some, like, you know, religious, like, conservative takes, but I almost don't consider those to be hot takes. I feel like they're almost by definition like the coldest takes in the book, you know, like, so even though, like, they might get some push, I don't know, like, I feel like one I'll throw out maybe is that the printing press, I think, was like a mistake. The printing press and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. And that, like, having a manuscript culture is much better. Like, actually written manuscripts are, you know, all the benefits of the printing press are outweighed by the drawbacks of, you know, the homogenization and the lack of intimacy created by not having manuscripts. So I think that, you know, if you look back at, for instance, Islamic manuscripts from, like, you know, the thriving manuscript culture of the Islamic, you know, general ecumene before the time of the printing press. The Ottomans made the right choice in being slow to adopt it. I'm going to take a strong anti-printing press stance. I mean, I feel like just being like Satan's real is like one that gets pushed back, but that's not like the one that's going to get like going to seem spicy to the audience of this podcast.
That's true, but in the outside world, I think that definitely. We've seen a lot of that this week. We're recording this on the week that Lil Nas X released his Satan shoes and his video where he twerks on Daddy Satan. Yeah, so that's been on.
I was a little bit impressed by like the amount of pushback that he got, but it was also like kind of from like, you know, people who I'm not like super stoked to have like, you know, on aligned with me on the Satan issue, like Candace Owens or whatever, you know. So I'm trying to think. I don't know. What do you like? Why don't you throw one out? I'll think if I have some others.
I mean, it is hard. I mean, yeah, I feel like there's certain hot takes that like we repeat regularly, so they're nothing new. Yeah, I mean, like what are the hottest takes I feel comfortable sharing? Or the most consistent pushback I've gotten? I don't know, like saying the Eagles are good. Get a lot of pushback.
Saying the Eagles are good.
Saying the Eagles are good. It fucking triggers people. It pisses people off. A lot of people. There's always a surprising amount of people that are, you know, willing to like that'll ride with you when you say that, you know, that feel it too. But it's like there's this cloud where you're not allowed to acknowledge that they were one of the best bands, or that they're simply just good. Like they have to be lame for some reason. There has to be something wrong with them. There's no way that they have like the best-selling album in American history. They're just, I don't know. I think we've mentioned it before. Like there's the aspect of the ubiquity of like it's been on radio nonstop for like 50 years, and I think a lot of people don't like listen a little deeper to it. Like Hotel California. They might think Hotel California. It's like the silly thing. Speaking of like Satanism in rock music, you know, there was that rumor that Anton LaVey was like lurking in the photo, like in the liner notes of like Hotel California. Like he's like up on the balcony, like in the shadows, and that basically, you know, the whole Hotel California album is like an ode to Satan or something like that, which it so is not. If you're listening to it, it's a pretty anti-satanic album, pretty anti like American album, really. Like if you listen to The Last Resort, the final track on it, talk about not erasing genocide. They go there. But yeah, I mean, we're going to do an Eagles episode. It's coming. So, you know, everybody get excited. We're going to do it in the next month. So I don't need to say too much more on that right now. Yeah. I don't know if I've gotten like pushback. Maybe I'm just like, maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I'm just tactful or like tactical about what I go off on. I actually, you know what? Okay, no, I'll give a little red meat to Jimmy Fallon Gong. I think that I probably would get pushback if I like tweeted about this, but I do feel like the liberal culture around abortion susses me out. I'm not anti, like I support like the legality of it. Pretty much,
right?
Yeah. So like I'm not like
people being like, I just got an abortion, like it's
like
great,
shout your
you know,
abortion,
like,
shit like that. Yeah, and also like the absolute unassailability of Planned Parenthood and the fact that Margaret Sanger was like a huge fucking eugenicist and incredibly racist and like wanted to put Planned Parenthoods mostly in like Harlem and in black neighborhoods because she thought they should reproduce less. There's just a lot of stuff like that. And then you see today and it's like you can't say shit without basically getting like put in like you're a crazy pro-life like piece of shit who wants women to be enslaved, like you fucker. I don't know. I'm just going off of like conversations I've had with like women that I know who also feel a kind of like have a similar view of like I don't want it to be outlawed, but some of this like social media stuff just like championing it as like a thing is just like fucking awesome. And like, you know, or posting, I don't know, it's like whenever some like Candace Owens person like posts something pro-life, like post a picture of like a dead fetus like under, it's like, yo, chill the fuck out, like, you know what I mean? Like I feel like it's not like it's not like an experience to be like idealized. I think there's I mean, even birth control has its problems with hormones and things like that. I know a lot of women have had like pretty shitty experiences on that stuff. But still, it's like there's just something about it, like, in our culture. Maybe it hasn't been as prominent over the last few years, but I mean, I remember when there was that, like, what was it? Like the James O'Keefe thing in like 2015 or 2016, where they were talking about, like, they're selling babies for Lamborghinis, folks. You know, Alex Jones is like, go, like, look at her slurping champagne, talking about. But there was a little bit of like a callousness in some of those like hidden videos towards the people talking about how they're going to like sell the aborted fetuses from the Planned Parenthood clinic to like a bio research company, and like how much money the clinic was going to make from it, and just felt a little bit like, and you know, if I want to even go double down on that, I would say, okay, no, this leads to an even hotter take. I'm going to do it. People can hate me. One child policy in China, kind of fucked up. Kind of fucked up.
Well, it's funny that, like, but
even though it's worth saying that like Uyghurs and other people in rural populations were allowed to have 2 kids.
It's funny because they were for a while, but then like after, you know, like China realized that it was actually not to their advantage, or like that the overpopulation concerns that kind of motivated it, like it didn't really pan out, because that was like an original sort of climate change level scare.
Yes.
Then, like, actually a lot of the people who have been interned are interned for violating the one-child policy now, or limitations on children. But
so if you've been interned, you get demoted to one child?
Well, a lot of the reason why people have been interned is because they've been determined that they violated the policy.
Oh, okay. So it's and you know, I think that one thing that's interesting that never gets talked about with the one-child policy, I think there's often this like conflation to think of it as like almost like this peak Maoist policy of like the ultimate cultural revolution. Like Mao just like wanted to control everybody's wombs, and like communism just wants to like own everything about you. But actually, if you look at it, no, like Mao, I read a couple academic papers about it recently, and while Mao, he might have said some things about how maybe we should have some kind of program to like, you know, basically like manage the population a little better, but he never entertained the idea of like we should have a compulsory policy. And it was Daddy Deng who instituted that, and most people I think maybe don't know this, but he partly did so at the like fanatical urging of Western NGOs like the Club of Rome, and I believe like the IMF and the World Bank, who actually went so far as to predicate giving financial loans and like more integration into the global capitalist system. They made it conditional upon instituting the one-child policy. So it was actually Westerners and the capitalist revisionist daddy himself that actually instituted this highly, quote-unquote, authoritarian policy, which did have a lot of, you know, they still claim today. Now, you know, they basically phased it out. I think Xi phased it out right after he got into power. And what they say today is like, well, look, it had a great impact. Look how wealthy we are today. It wouldn't have been possible if everybody had a bunch of kids. But that's debatable, I think. I think it's quite debatable. There could have been systems of incentives or other things like that that don't involve just like setting a hard limit. And I think it bodes a little bit sus for the rest of the capitalist world and the West, who maybe thought that we were immune to this kind of a pervasive government control into your life and your personal decisions and your reproductive health. But now everybody's downloading their Excelsior pass and their COVID pass on their phone, so they're going to have to show like a bio card to go do lots of things, right? And so all of a sudden it feels like, oh, actually, you could. Oh, I don't think there would ever be a literal one-child policy, but I could totally imagine. You know, Bill Gates doesn't want people to have more than one fucking kid, right? Like, no way, no fucking
not.
way,
Yeah.
no way that Jeff Bezos, 2 or 3, I think. But you know, I think that's kind of irrelevant because he's special. He's better than us.
Yeah.
So I think all these people like Bezos and Klaus Schwab and all these psychos, do they want like working class and poor people or even middle class people to have like more than one kid? Probably not, because I guarantee, you cannot convince me that when they're sitting around thinking about how are we going to quote unquote respond to climate change, that nobody has brought up that idea, which was so popular in the 70s with like the Club of Rome, that we need to like curb population growth on Earth because we're going to run out of resources. So, it's like, well, Bill Gates like slipped years ago of saying like, like he said a bunch of times about different places, like, do this, or you might have population growth in places you don't want it, like Yemen. And it's like, ooh, okay. Or, talking about in Africa, how like he really wants to like expand reproductive health access in Africa, like really, really, really badly. It just wants to limit those childbirths in Africa specifically. And it is not hard to think that like that is something that when they're on Epstein's Island at their little scientific powwow, that they're talking about, look, it's like, the Georgia Guidestones, another weird monument that like Ted Turner probably put up, but that like dreams of a world where like the population is reduced to like 500 million people. And I think that like the ruling class, that's a constant threat to their power, is having too many damn hungry mouths to feed around. So I feel like in America, it's going to take a lot of like, I feel it in our culture. I feel that there's like an antinatalism, an indirect antinatalism that has seeped into our culture, but it's not really allowed to be like called out for like what it is. Like, I think that, the growing cost of like having a child and being able to provide for them is skyrocketed, especially in big cities. It used to be kind of maybe a cool new thing when like women enter the workforce in the 70s and the 80s, but now it's just like a necessity. Like both people have to work, and, if you're lucky, you can combine both your incomes, but, and then simultaneously this hyper valorization of like abortion as just like an awesome thing, and just like there's nothing, it's weird because even in the 90s, like, people like Hillary Clinton would say, like, like safe, legal, and rare, right? Like that was kind of like the gesturing that Democrats used to have, which I think actually was like pretty savvy messaging and probably hit with like the majority of that was probably the most maximalist kind of slogan you could have or position to have on it, is that, look, I'm not just like totally praising abortion, but it should be safe, it should be legal for people that really need it, and hopefully we can have other policies that can make it more rare instead of just like more common, because it's kind of like that's like a last line of defense, I feel like, for having an unwanted pregnancy, or why is it unwanted? Like, you could easily see a culture where nobody can afford to have a baby, so then the liberals are there being like, oh, we'll just go get an abortion, it's cool. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like that's different from like, I really don't, or my God, like you were raped or something, that it's like different than like, I don't want to have this baby no matter what, and like the forces of society are like bearing down upon me and like almost bullying me into like, don't have that baby, don't have it, like get rid of it, like a little devil, like
you're giving up your career, your life, which is, to be fair, probably true, that like, the way society's configured now, like, to have like a middle class life, like it's not very feasible for you to have like a child at 18 or something,
for sure. I mean, not saying like anybody should like have one at 18, like, but like that's another thing that I'd almost say, like, as a hot take, is that like there's certain advantages to like a traditional paradigm of society where like such a thing would be like unthinkable and like a huge scandal, and like if it were, to have kind of like extramarital like sex rampantly, there is in a way like certain aspects of that are appealing. Obviously there's things that one could criticize as well, but like in this case, like this is perhaps an example where like it causes this like awful decision, which I think should be seen as like not an easy, I agree with you that it shouldn't be seen as like an easy choice to make. It's something that I think should be made by the people who actually face that choice, but like I think that for most people, sometimes you'll see pushback to the idea like, no one really wants to get an abortion, like no one wants, something that becomes necessary sometimes under certain circumstances, but like the idea that like this is something that's like desirable or like pleasant or not like, a deeply traumatic experience, like I think, I don't know, like I feel like that's a misleading idea. Obviously other people like can
have it out. Like, I am not someone who will ever be in the position to have an abortion personally, so can't really say. But I do think that, yeah, maybe there's I think what you're saying in terms of like, yeah, the valorization or the sacramentalization of this thing that really is like a regrettable situation. You know, it. Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
And
like,
you know, maybe sometimes it's like not regrettable. That's fine. I guess, you know, like that's your personal choice. Like, it's like it doesn't have to. I'm not saying, you know, you have to be traumatized by it. You know, if it's not traumatic, like that's great. Like, you know, that's great. But I think for a lot of people, it's at least not a great kind of situation, you know, to find yourself in. So maybe let's not like do the whole hashtag campaign about like shouting your abortion and like just like for everybody who had one and like doesn't feel like shouting about it, that's a little bit cringy, like, and kind of fucked up a little bit. I don't know, it's like,
yeah. And I feel like maybe there is, I'm not like, you know, obviously like people know themselves better than I know them, but I think that maybe some of that is like a way of dealing with something, because like if you think about it, like it's obviously something that you would prefer to not have to go through. You know, it's not just like a matter of like, oh, you know, maybe I won't have to have this happen, or maybe I will, like, whatever, it makes no difference to me, except like it takes up some time of my day or something, you know. It's obviously like something that would have an effect on you, so I think like the, you know, the idea that this is like something that is just like routine or like a natural thing, like it's something that I don't think it's something that people should have to go through ideally, you know. I think that maybe like many situations, like it's the best alternative, like, you know, many
Absolutely.
situations one can think of, but like, of course, ideally, like, no, I don't know if that's really a hot take, but I will one potentially hot take I will say is that, you know, Margaret Sanger, you know, is not as bad as she's often portrayed to be, like in some of our memes, you know. I think, like, obviously she was a eugenicist, like, in the way that, like, many people at the time were, but Margaret Sanger actually was anti-abortion. Fun little fact about her. She was anti-abortion.
Wait, really?
She was the creator of Planned Parenthood, yes, but she was not an advocate of abortion. At least, you know, her whole thing was, you know, birth control so that people won't have to have abortions, you know. She was very much the extreme version of safe, legal, and rare. She viewed abortion as being, like, a very shameful thing that, like, you know, she was trying to prevent from happening. So and the whole, like, the thing about, like, I don't really know how to appraise, like, she had different, like, racial views that were expressed, but, like, you know, I think some of the ones that get, like, circulated are a little bit, like, distorted, but I mean, I won't defend her too much because, like, obviously, like, she was someone who traveled in these eugenic circles, but it's you know, a common idea that like she was this big advocate of abortion, but she actually wasn't. She was an advocate of birth control.
So that was a shift that happened later. Later, probably in the 60s and 70s. And I think even Roe v. Wade, I've definitely heard some people like maybe that what nudged the Supreme Court towards legalizing it in 74. That was actually, I think, the same year that the Club of Rome came out with their apocalyptic report about overpopulation and how there's just going to be too many people and we need to like limit it. So in a way, it was almost like that was America's alternative to doing a one-child policy, was like, well, like, let's just make abortion like available. And then, you know, that will maybe have...
I do think that RBG, for her part, you know, she actually was... I think that she did make a good point that abortion will always be available for the richest women. You know, for people who have money, they will always have it available, and, like, it will always happen. So that is a fair point, you know, like, again, like, part of the law is to teach or, like, to, you know, encourage certain things. And, like, obviously, like, you know, I think that you can make certain determinations, maybe, I don't know, but like,
and there's two ways you could read that. Also, you could read that in a kind of I mean, I think I could both read that in a kind of optimistic way of like, well, yeah, like, it shouldn't be, you know, you shouldn't be discriminated against by class, by basically, you know, poor people either have to get dangerous illegal abortions or whatever, but, you know, rich women can always get it. So like, that's a positive kind of seems like an egalitarian thing, but at the same time there is a little thing of like, oh, the bourgeoisie is like letting all the poor people have abortions now, kind of encouraging them to go get them and stuff, like, just as they get completely obsessed with overpopulation. and it's a little bit like, oh, okay, like I think I see maybe there's a more like cynical, pragmatic motivation maybe behind it.
Cultural shift in the idea, the encouragement that like if you become pregnant, one of your most salient like options is to get an abortion, but we have like a very radically different society from even like what it was in the 19th century, where it would be like a huge scandal to have a child or to be like implicated in having sex out of wedlock even. So this is like a huge change, and we're still like really trying to grapple with like how to deal with this, because it's really something that like I can't really think. I mean, people definitely have always had success out of wedlock, but there's always been like a moral framework that has existed that like would where that would be something that would just be like in not conceivable or a real issue for like all
or
parties
in
concerned,
certain
like families,
sectors of society there were always a part of a city or out in the frontier or something like that where it's like all the brothels in London and New York during the Victorian era where everyone was so supposedly uptight. Everybody was still running around kind of screwing each other, but it was like much more, it wasn't in this open way that we saw in the late 20th century of like promoting that as kind of a value that everybody should openly aspire kind of like towards.
Brothels used to be like a place of like absolute shame and like degradation, whereas like now it's like
OnlyFans,
kind of like a legitimate form of work. It's just something that we just and like actually maybe good, or like something that like one shouldn't feel ashamed of, or something like that. I don't know. It's kind of a hot take in society to even suggest that there might be a place for shame or whatever. Like no one should ever be ashamed of who they are. But
do not blank shame.
And I'm not saying that we need to like turn back the clock and like reinstitute like a vast system of various shames and guilts that like are used, or really like social sort of protocols that were very important mechanisms for the running of society. But I think that it definitely is true that we're still trying to deal with the removal of that, the transformation in it, and I don't know what the consequences are. But I mean, this is the world that we live in, so I think it's something that we're comfortable with, but we still might have some appreciation for things having been better or things having been easier in some ways, or
simpler, I guess.
I guess that's kind of another hot take I might have. Maybe simpler, or I mean, well, that's like probably my most fundamental hot take, is that like Sharia is good. There's good things about Sharia. One thing I'll say is like this is like kind of a reactionary take. Like I think democracy, even though like I'm pretty partial to democracy, like I like the idea of it, I think it's a little bit overrated, and I think that like in many cases like societies that appear democratic like aren't for practical purposes like much more democratic than like an oligarchy or like a monarchy would be, and that it's very conceivable to have like a monarchy or an aristocracy that would be like more fulfilling or a better environment for one's self-actualization than like some democracies.
Well, it's a little bit like Paul Robeson said at one of those Senate hearings where he challenged the idea that that like the authoritarianness of a country is like intrinsically linked to like its political ideology. I think in many cases it can be, but the idea that because a country calls itself a democracy, like it's such a really meaningless metric, because like authority is a universal phenomena. Like some people will be we got to get rid of all authority. Like that doesn't just seems to me inconceivable that there would be any kind of system like where there wouldn't be authority that would operate in some way. To say that you want to have a revolution but you want to get rid of all forms of authority is like the funniest shit I've ever heard. What is a revolution if not taking authority from somebody else, from a group or a ruling class or something, whoever's in charge, and taking that authority, and then what you're supposed to just like snap your fingers once you've taken it and like throw it in the fires of Mount Doom in Mordor or something, and then everyone will just be chill. Like, that's just no.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So I'm
with you
kind
on
of
that.
in between. I'm kind of in between on that issue. Like, on one hand, like, you know, I see how, like, in a lot of our democracies, like, choices are very illusory, or that the will and desires of the people, like, aren't properly advocated or brought forth by our representatives. But at the same time, you know, like, when most people who are like, we must restore, like, the good society, or, like, you know, like a true aristocracy is needed, like, all those people, like, suck, and, like, I definitely am more, like, inclined to democracy than, like, those people are. So, you know, I'm kind of, like, in between those two poles of being like, what? Like, you know, you think, like, tyranny could be good, or, like, you know, or, you know, like, upholding democracy or, like, liberal values is, like, the, you know, the sine qua non of, like, a functioning society versus, like, someone who, you know, is, like, a monarchist and, like, desires the restoration of, like, an aristocracy or, like, a Qureshi rule or something like that, you know.
I mean, I believe in democracy, people's democracy, led by Vanguard
but
Party.
what if, like, there was a Vanguard Party, you know, or a dictatorship?
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. You can't have a people's democracy without a Vanguard Party to, you know,
need, like,
manage
a
the whole
Shura
thing.
Council. Yeah, well, that will be, like, from our last Q&A, the issue of Islamic Marxism. We need, like, a Shura Council.
Maybe you could have kind of bottom-up Shura
ruled by
councils that,
jurists.
you know, report up to the, you know, the Worldly Center or something.
The Wali,
like
the Worldly Center.
Think of worse ways to go about it.
I mean, like, there's sometimes, I guess, like, you know, it's something that you might vacillate on, depending on one's mood or whims, but there's definitely some times where you're like a mediocre Khanate would be, like, just as good as this, like, democracy that we have, you know, but
I'm not feeling the fetish anymore for it, that our institutions are just so fucking special in this bourgeois democracy that so responsive. I really felt
but that's
seen,
like, again,
you know.
That's a self-consciously, like, spicy take. I don't know. Do we have any others?
No,
they were mostly of the same flavor. They were all, like, kind of, like, reactionary takes. Do we have any, like super progressive takes that would, like, agitate reactionaries?
I feel like they're pretty front-loaded in terms of I don't know, our, like, antipathy towards U.S. imperialism and I don't know, like, it's and, like, my refusal to, like, say bad things about Stalin, and, you know, I mean, I think there's plenty there for reactionaries to, like, pick a bone with, basically.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But, you know, I like to give them a bone too. So. Yeah, or throw them a bone. Yeah. Number 3 now from Waveshape, and they ask, do either of you have any thoughts about Reza Nagaristani and Cyclonopedia complicity with anonymous materials? I was pretty excited to get this question because, I mean, you know, we do have thoughts about Nagaristani's Cyclonopedia complicity with anonymous materials, going back a number of years, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
when I first read this book, it must have been in 2016 it was recommended to me.
Okay.
So, I recommended it to you after that.
Yeah. I'll just say right off the bat, because that was during our kind of period of writing some screenplays together, and that was one book that you brought to me and to our other friend as something that could be maybe, like, adapted into either a movie or a TV show.
And
we actually we did. We never got to the point of actually laying down a draft of it, but I literally did.
Yeah, or really even but you
or an outline.
You pitch it to some people. Yeah,
I pitched it to a few different like executives at production companies around Hollywood when I was just kind of thinking like, oh, I got to have something to say. You know, the old what else are you working on kind of thing. And I did bring it up a few times, and one time I did get a pretty positive reaction from one executive who thought it sounded pretty interesting. It's a hard thing to kind of, you know, bottle up into like a 1 minute sort of like Hollywood pitch, you know, because it belongs in this.
It's extremely difficult. It's not really a narrative book at all, you know, even though it has like fictional or like hyperstitional elements, you know, it's not really it was more like a tone, I guess.
It's theory fiction, right? Isn't that the kind of subgenre? Yeah,
yes.
Which is really interesting. I personally think we were probably too ambitious to think about it as like a TV pilot, because you're right, like it doesn't have a kind of like coherent narrative backbone so much. It'd probably do better as like a very weird movie, if anything.
Maybe, yeah. I think like you know, something like in that vein could basically, you know, because it's more or less like a Lovecraftian like pastiche with like certain I mean, I feel like the interesting hook for like people in the terms of the fictional aspect of it is like the idea of oil like being alive and being like a like a sentient kind of like Lovecraftian sort of entity that is like trying to achieve unity or like the mockery of the solar empire or whatever, and thereby like, you know, and it's manipulating like all these geopolitical forces to like achieve that. I think that's you know, interesting. It's interesting that I think, you know, Reza Negarestani is like not really into the book anymore and doesn't like care for it. At least like following him on Twitter, he's made like some kind of like negative remarks about it in passing. Yeah, I had like actually like a small like fight with Reza Negarestani, like a relatively civil but small fight with him on Twitter once over like Persian poetry. Yes, he like had some kind of like edgy take about how like, you know, he's like, oh, they are insurgent philosophers, like, you know, storming the gates of heaven or whatever, and it's just like that's such a lame take, you know. So I was just like
the whole like Rumi was rebelling against Islam kind of
right, or
idea.
Like or when they say like burn down the Kaaba or whatever, that means like they are atheists or something, like, you know, it's not.
He does post some kind of lib takes, right? Doesn't he?
Yeah,
I think I follow him too. You were gonna like reach out to him at some point. Maybe you ruined that now by insulting him.
Well, I mean, he did offer. You know, he said, I think we were discussing Mansur al-Hallaj. Am I right? But yeah, I think maybe that was him, and he said that he had some letter of Hallaj's that he was going to send to me, some letter in Persian, and you know, we DM'd about it a little bit, but he never sent it to me. You know, apparently this is going to prove his ideas. So I don't know. I never received it. I even
It's very SJ in some ways, like the combination of geopolitics and the kind of characterization of oil as like a sentient sort of force with like its own agenda that is tied up with all these occult orders, like
type vibes. I think there's even a passage about like Pazuzu and Cyclopedia.
And there are, even though this was written, when was it written? Like 2000. Was it written as far back as like 2009, or was it like 2013 that it came out?
I think it was. Yeah, I don't think it came out around then. I think it was written pretty long.
Okay, because I remember that it predated ISIS, but when we were kind of talking about it and discovering it, it was like kind of peak Syrian war sort of days. And weren't there some kind of ISIS style Salafist terrorists that just wanted to blow up like every vertical structure to like flatten
that was like
everything?
The idea, that was like a theoretical concept, was that like, you know, they saw it like horizontality or whatever. It's all like very Deleuzian, you know. There's tons of like Deleuze in it, you know. So like territorialization. There's a couple characters, you know, in the book. Like there's one sort of Colonel Kurtz type figure,
Colonel West,
you know. Colonel West, right? Yeah, that fits. Who is all about like deterritoriality and like horizontalizing things, and there's discussion of drones and things like that. No, it's definitely an interesting book.
We got it on the shelf. Maybe one day one day.
Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode
Subliminal
about it
Jihad
one day, 'cause I think
Productions.
there's some interesting things on there. Yeah, it's Subliminal Jihad Production Company, Jihad Productions. Again, like I feel like some of like the Landian alignments of some of that stuff is like a little bit, you know, I'm not like super all about like the kind of like hyperstitional outsideness, like coldness, be my god type stuff, you know, like I think there's a little bit of like susness there. I think it definitely could be an interesting episode because it's such a popular book now, you know. I feel like I hear about it all the time, you know. When I first heard about it, I had never, you know, I heard about it from another graduate student, you know. I had never like
it is, you know,
before.
you could see it being like basically it's like Lovecraft country for theory brained grad students, you know, for them to feel seen in a Lovecraftian context.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, everyone just cheering every time like Deleuze is mentioned, or something like that.
Yeah, people do love Deleuze. He's, you know, one of the few people who is still just pretty valorized, pretty uncritically. But I think, you know, Deleuze has some problems. I think I mentioned it before, but like the whole rhizome versus tree thing doesn't make any sense. But anyway, Nick Land, I guess, wrote a blurb for, and so did Peter Lamborn Wilson, who wrote a blurb for Cyclonopedia. So that's a little bit like, So yeah, I don't know. I don't know about Reza, but you know, some of his takes are okay. Some of them, you know, provoke a little bit of pushback. But anyway, yeah.
Oh, Peter Lamborn Wilson. I always forget that's Hakeem Bey you're talking about, the pedo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
The temporary autonomous zone pedo.
Yes.
You want to move on to number 4?
Yeah, 4 is another one that, might be kind of a pun, but it says thoughts on Robert Anton Wilson / Discordianism. Also, have you read Gravity's Rainbow yet? As to the latter, like, I haven't, although I keep meaning to.
Same.
Busy times, you know, difficult. I mean, I did read it when I was young, but I would want to do a reread of it. I was also, Jimmy Falcon Gong recommended me another one of his books. It was...
Bleeding Edge? Vineland?
No, it was Against the Day.
Okay.
Yeah, he said that was interesting, and that was in a similar vein to our episode on spirit photography. And that's what made him, you know, recommend it. So I'd be interested to read that for like a Pynchon episode. But we might have to do a Pynchon series because there's so many books.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I definitely would want to read Gravity's Rainbow. But as to Robert Anton Wilson, I mean, I feel like he's come up a couple times on episodes since, you know, we last took the question of this same vein. About Robert Anton Wilson and maybe thoughts on him. I think it probably was formulated in a similar way, but that's from Molly Ringwald. This question comes, by the way. Where are some of the places that we've encountered him lately? I think we definitely came up in Jimmy Fallon Gong's episode.
Yes, it did, because he was part of the Ayn Rand group in New York that I guess, Jack Sarfati was involved in, and Walter Bream, the pedophile who ran the Gifted Children program. Where else he popped up to the extent that I think, I don't know if we really discussed the Adam Curtis documentary and like its treatment of Carrie Thornley, who's one of the founders of the Discordian Society.
I still haven't watched that just because everyone was you know, so I was like, do I really need to bother?
It is extremely and I say that as somebody who kind of likes his approach and like style as a kind of documentarian, but I'm getting increasingly frustrated by his like lazy sweeping takes on very complicated historical phenomena and his blind spots to things that should be super obvious. Like, how can you make Carrie Thornley an entire segment of your 9-hour documentary series and kind of like not go into Robert Anton Wilson or like the later history of the Discordians or anything else, and just be like, he testified for, he knew Harvey Oswald and then decided that, you know, there's no conspiracy, the end. Like, it's just really frustrating. But I think the Discordian Society is kind of significant and influential, and Robert Anton Wilson was. I think we probably talked about him and kind of his Illuminatus trilogy of books, which kind of popularized the idea of the Illuminati and arguably kind of shit-coded and like irony cloaked the entire discussion of conspiracies and kind of like jumbled them all together, like mixing kind of more wacky like UFO things with maybe more real kind of deep politics phenomena, and mixing it all in a big like merry prankster bag that you can never actually like sort out and make sense of. So to that extent, I find Robert Anton Wilson like fundamentally sus, and the Discordian society also very sus. And I feel like a lot of the early personalities that maybe were popular, I don't know, makes me think about people like Weave, like these kind of hacker type people. I think they were all, and like the Cult of the Dead Cow that Beto O'Rourke was in, I think a lot of those people had a certain Discordian influence, whether they properly realized it or not. You know, I feel like there were Discordians like probably on the Well and like on the Deadhead Usenet and stuff like back in the 80s. Like that was the type of population that was most early, that was plugged in the most early into the internet culture, and I feel like it probably had an outsized role in shaping it. And yeah, I don't know. I think he does deserve like a full kind of breakdown one day, and clearly the Grotto wants to know. They want to know more. So
he helped develop like the whole idea of neurolinguistic programming, didn't he? Like that was another thing that we kind of stumbled upon.
Yes, he might have had a Milton Erickson connection.
Yeah, possibly. He was friends with someone who we just mentioned, Peter Lambert Wilson, another Wilson, no relation, but they were good friends. You know, creepy Hakeem Bey, well-known like anarcho-pedo type Nambla dude. Yeah. He sort of, in his obituary for Robert Anton Wilson, which I'm currently looking at, suggested that he always appeared cheerful, which is either very good advertising for neurolinguistic programming, a theory he developed with Tim Leary, but which I never quite understood, or else for the therapeutic virtues of cannabis.
That's interesting. Wait, are they crediting Robert Anton Wilson and Tim Leary with developing neurolinguistic programming?
Yes, according to Peter Lambert Wilson in spring 2007 in The Fifth Estate, which I guess is, you know, a magazine where he often publishes, so you can read it online.
Okay, yeah. Oh, and now I'm remembering some of the things we mentioned. Like, yeah, he did a lot of stuff. He advocated Leary's 8-circuit model of consciousness, and also I think they combined to form like the symbol smile with like the I squared, which represents space migration, intelligence increase, and life extension. And yeah, like a lot of stuff like that. And very cool. You know, he said he was just like Chomsky, he was a libertarian socialist. But you know, then he said, I ask only one thing of skeptics: don't bring up Soviet Russia, please. That horrible example of state capitalism has nothing to do with what I and other libertarian socialists would offer as an alternative to the present system. By the 1980s, he was saying that he, quote, does not like the spread of socialism. So cool. Yeah, so you know,
like the spread of socialism.
Yeah, there's also the Church of the Subgenius, one of the more cringy edgelord atheist efforts to exist. You know, and he was, I think, he was Pope Bob in, you know, that wacky parody religion. Cool. Yeah, I think he really he
is the
intersects with so many people.
Like he's the essence of like fucking like this. He is the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah,
like,
he is
incarnate.
He is that we should all worship. We're definitely going to go in on him kind of deeply one day, because he was just in close proximity to so many things.
We'll read some of the Illuminatus stuff at some point. You know,
exactly.
Yes, he believed in every conspiracy, but also no conspiracy, because also like Fnord, like that's Spork, it's me, the Penguin of Doom. He's the Penguin of Doom.
Fnord.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
The nonsense word Fnord, invented by the writers of Principia Discordia. It is a subliminal message technique, a word the majority of the population since early childhood have been trained to ignore, but which they associate with a vague sense of unease. Oh no.
Yep, and see, the word has been used in newsgroup and hacker culture to indicate irony, humor, or surrealism. Dope.
Fnord.
Very cool.
Fnord. Very cool.
I'm overwhelmed by how... Yeah, the interjection Fnord is given hypnotic power over the unenlightened.
Wow, it is
according
NLP.
To the novel. Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Wow.
But that's interesting, because I think like Silva was supposed to be the actual, you know, founder of it, but I think they were based out of either Esalen or SRI or both or something like that. Oh yeah, Gregory Bateson, who I believe was very close, and Margaret Mead, his wife, who I think maybe they ran like the Macy conferences in either the late 50s or the early 60s. Yeah, the Macy conferences in cybernetics, and then later set on group processes from 54 to 60, all about social and behavioral sciences. And he was heavily associated with Stuart Brand of the Whole Earth catalog. And yeah, basically, I think they did a lot to popular, or I don't know, I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, Bateson was also in the OSS during World War II, along with dozens of other anthropologists. Cool. And yeah, I believe that he was big in kind of like promoting Robert Anton Wilson, and NLP was influenced like directly by some of Gregory Bateson's theories. So it's all part of the same kind of a scene, I guess you could say. Yeah, but we'll go in hard because I feel like we're not done. Oh yeah, at the center of the Grotto, basically blah blah blah. Esalen Institute is basically where it was discovered or developed in the 70s. So very cool, not sus at all.
Yes,
you know. Yeah, cool.
Right.
All right, so stay tuned for that. Okay, I guess we can move on to number 5 now from It's Drew Time. And he asks, any thoughts on the BTK killings and whether it was a program to kill style cover to assassinate intel types? I don't know.
Who were his victims? Were they intel types?
Well,
because I don't actually recall.
Yeah, this is referring to the Dennis Rader, the bind, torture, kill, or BTK killer from, I want to say Wichita. Yeah, Wichita and Park City, Kansas.
Yeah, there was a big lull in his killings, right? That's like a big thing about him.
Yeah,
is that, like,
I remember.
Did a bunch of stuff.
I remember him getting arrested in 2005. Like, I remember like the Red Siren like Drudge Report headline that like they caught the BTK killer, and he was just this like very mild mannered like family man. Was like a Cub Scout leader and active in his church and just kind of a normal middle American guy. But then he like immediately confessed to it all. It was like, yep, I totally did all these things. And so I never really, obviously, like at the time, like never really, it just assumed it was another crazy like serial killer from the 70s and 80s that got caught eventually. But now, of course, we're all living in a post, program to kill pilled state of mind these days. And so you have to I wonder about all of these famous serial killers, basically, to what extent something else could have been going on. I did kind of glance over just his Wikipedia summary to see if anything really jumped out. But I mean, the one thing I feel obliged to mention is that he served in the United States Air Force from 1966 to 1970. And according to, I guess, let me see what the source is. Maybe according to himself. Because he released a book, I guess, in 2019. But I guess he claimed that from a young age he harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He also exhibited zoo sadism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. He acted out sexual fetishes for voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxiation, and cross-dressing, little dress to kill. He often spied on female neighbors. Wow, this does sound like a twisted De Palma movie. He often spied on female neighbors while dressed in women's clothing, including women's underwear that he had stolen, and masturbated with ropes or other bindings around his arms and neck. And so I guess he kept all these things well hidden and was very normal. He was a staff sergeant in the Air Force. He was awarded the Good Conduct Medal and the Small Arms Expert Marksmanship Ribbon and the National Defense Service Medal. None of those sound particularly. I do see. Oh, okay, all right. I'll give you this here. Looking at the source, BTK suspect served in Alabama. Now, wouldn't we want to bet that maybe he was in Huntsville, Alabama, where all the Nazis were? He served a year there. Good conduct. He was clean cut. He did well. He was just a regular soldier. Interesting. Rader's military record has been the subject of intense interest since Charlie Otero told the AP in December that he believed his parents and 2 siblings were strangled by BTK in 1974 because of something his father did while serving in the Air Force. And I guess according to records obtained by FOIA,
that would be,
Raiders,
I guess, the angle. Yeah, because I was trying to figure out, like, you know, his victims, like whether, because it seemed like, yeah, they were mostly women at first, you know, like a string of
yes.
Yes. Women.
Yeah, nothing jumped out at me at first that made me think that these people were connected to anything, but get a load of this right here. Let me tell you if this sounds interesting. According to records, Raiders' tour of duty took him to bases throughout the United States and overseas. He was active duty from August 1966 to August 1970 and a reservist until June 1972. In February 1967, he was stationed at Brookley Air Force Base in Mobile, Alabama, where he worked on an antenna system installation and maintenance, his records show. In 1968, Rader was based at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa, and months later went to Tachikawa Air Base in Japan. So that's the Oswald spent some time in Japan. That jumps to mind. And his last assignment was in Denver, where his reserve unit was headquartered, but Rader was never actually based there. Police in Mobile are now trying to find old case files to see if any unsolved murders match the BTK killing. And I guess that's it. So Brookley Air Force Base, I don't know if that's in Mobile, so I guess maybe it's not the same one. As I guess it's closed. It closed down in 1969, actually, Brookley Air Force Base. And let me see if there are any Nazis there. Interesting. It was, I believe that MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, which is where JSOC is headquartered nowadays. This base moved to Tampa. So it was a supply base for the Air Material Command in the southeastern United States. Let me see. Come on. Where are you, Nazis?
This guy was a real freak. Like, I'm just reading some, you know, because I looked up some of his other, you know, victims, trying to see, like, what the questioner, who was it? It's Drew Time, was implying with the sort of intelligence connections, and the descriptions of, like, the murders that he committed, I guess, that he provided upon his arrest are quite gruesome. He
they are.
was a complete sicko. Pretty awful. So, if he was programmed to kill, they did.
Well, there was that one story. I'm forgetting what book it was in. I think it might have been in Tom O'Neill's Chaos, about the young Air Force guy that just, like, abducted and like raped and murdered a kid in the I might have even been in Kansas or Missouri or it was in the middle of the country somewhere in maybe like the 1950s, and the guy was just, like, completely stunned and had, like, no memory of doing it and was, like, completely, like, blacked out into some kind of trance and, like, went and did this. And I think it was Tom O'Neill that postulated, like, this is like a few years after MK Ultra really kicked into high gear, and maybe they were trying to program people to kill, and maybe this guy, you know, this is like an unintended consequence, or maybe it was like an intended, who knows, but he postulated, like, yeah, that was a really bizarre case, and maybe they were, you know, you always have to wonder with anybody that was, like, serving in the military at this time, like, were they put through any kind of, you know, experimental program? There was that article from the mid-70s, I think it was in the Sunday Times in London, about the Navy doctor that claimed that they had an entire screening program for basically testing out enlisted soldiers for being, you know, programmable to kill, basically. Like, did they have pre-existing sadistic tendencies or antisocial personality tendencies that could be maybe exploited? And, you know, as we talked about in, like, the hypnosis episode, like, there's, like, one factor is a susceptibility maybe to, like, you know, hypnotic induction, and then maybe another one is, like, a propensity for, like, antisocial behavior. So if BTK Killer is telling the truth that he had the classic serial killer thing going on when he was a child, like torturing animals and stuff like that, would that perhaps have been discovered while he was serving in the military? And then, you know, because he sounds like, according to that doctor whose name I forget, he said, you know, basically, like, it sounds like Dennis Rader was, like, an ideal candidate for that kind of program, of being, like, a program to kill assassin, because he was already, like, fucked up somehow and, like, sadistic. And, you know, I think they would do things like, it's very Clockwork Orange, where they would show them, you know, gruesome videos, and like hook them up to like a little machine or like, the parallax view, and test their kind of like, biophysical like responses to the stimuli and their emotional response to the stimuli. And, I guess the more comfortable you were with it, the better of a candidate you were, because you had, you were a sicko. So I don't know. At the same time, I don't quite see. It seems like he did it because this is all based on DNA evidence. Mm-hmm. So I kind of would assume that.
Well, two things that stand out to me are, one, like the fact that his first murders, like even though maybe the ones that are more famous because of their gruesomeness and his description of them are like, killings of young women like in their 20s. That he committed like first in 1974 and then two in 77. His actual first murders that are ascribed to him are all on one day, and it was of that whole family,
the Otero. Yeah, Joseph Otero.
Exactly, which is
interesting.
Odd. Because usually he would kill like one person at a time, so that's kind of unusual. Like, it does stand out. If I don't know if anybody else had that connection. I mean, those include the only male victims that he had was that family, the young boy.
Yes.
And the man, Joseph Otero. So, yeah, and then he killed again, like, a few months later. Then he stopped for, like,
3 years.
Several years, started again. Yeah, then he killed, like, a little spurt in the mid-'80s, killed two people, and then he killed one last person, a 62-year-old woman, in 1991. So it's interesting that his pattern kind of changed. I mean, it's not outside the realm of just what a psycho would do, but it is odd that, like, I mean, I guess these people, serial killers, one, like, the idea about them is that they're huge narcissists and, like, they demand, like, credit and attention for what they're doing, but the fact that, like, it was a cold case, he hadn't been caught, he had gotten away with it, he hadn't killed anyone for a decade, and then suddenly he just started sending letters, and that, like, led to his arrest. I mean,
yeah.
Again, that does fit the pathology, but it's a little bit odd.
It is a little bit odd, yeah. Or, did he want to, get caught? His court-appointed psychologist, Robert Mendoza, diagnosed him with narcissistic, antisocial, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorders. He observed that Rader has a grandiose sense of self, a belief that he is special, and therefore entitled to special treatment, a pathological need for attention and admiration, a preoccupation with maintaining rigid order and structure, and a complete lack of empathy for his victims. I mean, I guess he did at his sentencing. He read like a rambling, like 30-minute "please execute me" statement, like apologizing, but I guess it didn't strike people. I do kind of remember that of like him. He was almost like unique among serial killers for really going into like saying what he did or like acknowledging it, but I guess a lot of people read it as like, again, like a kind of grandiose posturing. Yes, like he kind of enjoyed like repeating in detail everything he did.
The stories. Yes. Right.
Even though it was in a very, I think, a kind of like a regretful tone or something. I'm such a sicko, blah blah blah, and that kind of thing. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say with BTK.
Yeah, the whole, like, the attribution of his name, like, I'm the bind, torture, killer. It's very insane. It is interesting that, like, he never killed anyone, like, while he was in the Air Force. Like, they looked into it to try to find these murders, but he didn't. I guess, it was the same idea that he would have taken credit for whatever he did. So, yeah.
There was a little bit of a, like, disagreement that I guess the Associated Press cited an anonymous source alleging Rader had confessed to other murders in addition to those with which he had been connected. The Sedgwick County District Attorney denied this, but refused to say whether Rader made any confessions or if investigators were looking into Rader's possible involvement in more unsolved killings. But on March 5th, news sources claimed to have verified by multiple sources that Rader had confessed to the 10 murders he was charged with, but no other ones. So, I don't know. There were some rumors floating around that he was saying that he was involved in other things, but then that got kind of like shut down real quick. And yeah, so I don't know. You could take the district attorney at their word, but you could also wonder if like they moved in to like, I don't know, they gave him like a sodium amytal shot or like rehypnotized him and like, all right, stop talking with the other ones.
It's odd that, the National Personal Record Center woman Ursula Soto said, his service was very much clean cut. He did well. He was just a regular soldier. Just a regular soldier.
Okay, you know what though? Here's one other thing, one other source here. This is from 2018, but a little more up our alley. Kansas BTK serial killer Dennis Rader said, quote, "A demon within me made him murder." Oh, so here we go. Like, here we go again. Like, demons are chill. They're your friend. Yeah, he said, let's see, Dennis Rader, a church-going family man who murdered 10 people, including 2 children, over a span of 3 decades, has opened up about what drove him to kill. I guess there was an Oxygen documentary called Snaps, Notorious BTK Serial Killer in 2018. That might be interesting to watch, but I guess there was a never-heard interview with Rader as he recounted his childhood and heinous crimes. Some family members of Rader's victims, as well as investigators and those who knew Rader, also came forward to speak out. The former code inspector and church president, pled guilty in 2005. Where's his
pictures that demon thing? He took of himself? Like,
I
googled
mask.
that, and this audit, horrifying.
Oh
horrifying.
My god, yeah, wow, I'm looking at it right now. It's fucking creepy. Oh my god, that's terrifying.
Yeah, there might be a demon inside him. Yeah, and apparently he would do a lot of like mask stuff. In the documentary, Rader claimed it was Factor X that drove him to kill. I personally think, and I know it's not very Christian, but I actually think it's a demon that's within me, he said. At some point in time, it entered me when I was young, and it basically controlled me. Well...
Wow. I mean, on the one hand, you could say this guy is just making up some kind of excuse. You know, I guess he was a publicly very Christian, so maybe he's offloading his responsibility onto a demon. But at the same time, I mean, like one way or another, yeah, it does seem like there was a demon inside of him. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean he shouldn't be punished. But
the name of the demon or of the force or whatever is very eerie and odd. Factor X.
That sounds almost scientific. He had something else.
Yeah, it sounds like something that he would be like injected with. Like
he also had a creepy. He had a creepy word.
He called the serial killer inside him the Minotaur. That's
wow.
odd too.
Okay. Yeah, no, when he was planning the murder of Maureen Hedge in 1985, he planned and like bought all these materials and stuff to prepare for it, and he called his plan Project Cookie. I don't know why, but the idea that he was calling it like a project like is sus. I don't know, like almost like an operation. So he thought that BTK killer called it Factor X and Minotaur.
Yes, the serial killer inside, he said he drew a distinct line between his normal life and the times when he went dark. As a kid, the sight of chickens waiting to be slaughtered aroused him. Later, he fantasized about tying women down into train tracks and masturbated to his father's book about the Lonely Hearts Killer. All of these traits belong to the Minotaur, his personification of the sexual impulses and violent tendencies that made a serial killer. He argues that he started out as a white hat, but was periodically dragged to the dark side. That divide was apparent even in the way that he wrote his letters. Most of the correspondence was boring, daily log kind of stuff, says Dr. Ramsland. All of a sudden, you can feel that you're suddenly in Minotaur territory. It's almost like you're paddling at the surface of the water and suddenly something pulls you down.
Yikes. That is very weird.
His narcissistic personality led him to imagine himself as kind of a spy, says Dr. Ramsland, which contributed both to his need of secrecy and layers in their communication and his sense of invulnerability, which eventually led to his capture. He loved to read true crime and detective magazines. Yeah, I'm reading this Rolling Stone piece about, I guess, Confessions of a Serial Killer, which is the big book that recently came out, about him.
That is a lot. So he thought he was a little bit of a spy. There's a Factor X that unleashed the Minotaur, which was basically an alter, kind of. It was like a kind of, it sounds like a bit of a split personality kind of thing.
Yeah, well, what she said
all
was
the
that
traits.
it was, exactly. It's the combination of unique sexual impulses, desire for fame, and delusions of a spy-like double life, intersecting with his fantasy life, and most practically, the opportunity to commit the murders. Crucial, though, was that first family of 4. When that first incident occurred, she says, he might have decided that it really wasn't all it's cracked up to be and thought, I don't think I'll do this again, but instead it was highly exciting. That ensured he would kill again. I don't think he told me everything, she says, and I don't think he always told me the truth, but I think I got Rader pretty well. So that's her idea of what Factor X was.
Yeah, he created a distinct and most professional language around his murders. His victims were projects. A murder was a hit. The act of killing someone was putting them down. He worked with Dr. Ramsland because he wanted to uncover the thing inside him that made him, quote, go dark, an element he calls Factor X. But like most serial killers who talk to the press, quote, he doesn't like that it wasn't that hard. He wants it to be this intense, deep mystery that no one will ever quite access. So instead, she helped pick himself apart. They watched documentaries and analyses of other serial killers, try to give him the vocabulary and frame of reference to create his guided biography. And she does say, I don't think he always told me the truth, but I think I got Rader pretty well. So I don't know. Maybe she did, but at the same time...
Yeah,
there's a little bit of a weirdness here.
Factor X, Minotaur, I don't know. Yeah.
Very odd. Very odd.
Minotaur isn't Kenneth Anger made a movie called The Minotaur, didn't he?
I think he did.
It was involving the Minotaur. It was like the Minotaur in space. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a very interesting image. It's the idea, of course, like the labyrinth is like a very popular sort of spiritual idea, very provocative. It's an unusual thing to choose. It does have that sort of suggestion of layers, I wonder why, saying that there's a demon inside of you isn't very creative, but specifically classifying it as a Minotaur, even Factor X isn't really that, evocative, but Minotaur is.
They also, one interesting thing that was noted in another article is that he had, quote, afterlife plans for his female victims, including one who was to be his mistress and another who would act as his bondage servant. That reminds me a lot of
Jeffrey
the MK'd guy in the Geraldo special that like killed his friends so that he could have 10,000 souls in hell. That's like a common thing with serial killers. Is they have this strange occultist belief that anybody they murder will become like their slave in the afterlife, which is a very specific belief to have. I don't think it necessarily, you know what I mean? Like that's a very specific kind of spiritual belief to have. It's not just like a thing. You could be a sadistic killer and just love like killing people, I would assume. And it doesn't have to have this extra like spiritual component of like, it sounds like you made a pact with like the devil, basically, because who's going to give you this power to, be to enslave people like after you die or whatever.
It does mirror like beliefs about like, usually like it's a bit different because it's not like the conversion of like random people into slaves, like it's simply like killing interring one slaves with one, to so that they'll continue to serve you in the afterlife. But that was a relatively common practice historically, like by kings and various civilizations,
but going out and murdering somebody so that you could collect their souls so they could like serve you in hell is something that I feel like was not necessarily a big phenomenon until like the 70s and 80s and 90s of like serial killer, the golden age of serial killers.
Of that earlier idea, for sure. The one person I can think of is Jeffrey Dahmer, although I'm not sure like if his idea was that they would serve him in hell or in the afterlife, or if he thought like he would make them into like mind-controlled zombie slaves in this life. Similar idea, but maybe not exactly the same.
But he killed them, so that
he did kill them. But I think that like before that, he wanted to like have them like be zombies, like he had like when he was giving them sleeping pills and like sedatives and raping their unconscious bodies and things like that.
He was another military veteran stationed in West Germany, I think, in the 80s. And it's just like, where are these people getting these ideas?
Those people were in the militaries. Right. So he
or Ramirez,
victims,
kind of Ramirez like
their heads and filled their head with bleach. Wow, this is the Trump COVID cure. But the experiment wasn't successful, and both his victims died. That was how he was trying to create sex slaves.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's just they like straight. Whenever you see a phenomenon like this rise up, and then suddenly it's like, oh look, like they all have the same exact like completely insane beliefs that are not necessarily like rooted in our culture. Like it's not something you would just like. This is before like movies came out where maybe that was something that was said. Like it was just kind of out of nowhere, and between the military influence and between some of these people actually doing it explicitly, like saying like, yeah, I did this for Satan so that he would give me power in hell. Who was disseminating these ideas? Because according to like Aleister Crowley and like Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino,
dance for him and
I'll
kill him,
and then you can just kill him and then become Satan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
That's
easy,
cool.
not a big deal. It's easy.
Totally cool.
Don't worry about it. There's definitely a lot there. The Jeffrey Dahmer thing makes me think of like the serpent and the rainbow and that kind of idea of like using a certain potion to make someone a zombie. But of course, there's all these. It is the sort of metaphysical beliefs of serial killers are intriguing. There was that one guy who thought that he had to prevent earthquakes, and so he killed people to like prevent earthquakes. Yeah, it was Herbert Mullen. Yeah, he killed 13 people in California in the early 70s, and he claimed that they prevented earthquakes. Yes,
that's a very California-specific pathology, but still, interesting. Interesting.
He was later to claim that the victim was Jonah from the Bible and that he had sent Mullen a telepathic message saying, "Pick me up and throw me over the boat. Kill me so that others will be saved." Okay.
Wow. All right. I mean, it sounds like maybe somebody who has a split personality and they're like trying to warn everybody.
He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia.
Okay.
He believed that the Vietnam War had produced enough American death to forestall earthquakes as a sort of blood sacrifice to nature. But that with the war winding down by late 1972, he would need to start killing people in order to have enough deaths to keep the earthquake away.
That is dark. That is very dark. Yeah.
He also decided to join the U.S. Marines and pass the physical and psychiatric tests.
Wow.
However, he was refused entry when it was found out that he used drugs.
Yeah. Okay.
This is actually pretty funny. This rejection fueled Mullen's paranoid delusions of conspiracies, behind which he believed was a powerful group of hippies. He was right.
Not wrong.
He was not wrong. That was the most sane thing that he believed.
Well, he was in California, so I wonder what mental hospitals he got ran through.
This is interesting. 8 days after his arrest, a 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck the Point Mugu area in Southern California, causing an estimated $1 million in damage.
All right. Well,
that would possibly be an interesting episode to explore too.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyways.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
I think we
so
can.
Hopefully we did enough on that BTK situation. To assassinate intel types, I don't know. It doesn't seem like most of them were. I don't know if the Oteras how much, but could be. I don't know. Anyway. So
nothing that we can see now, but we might come back to it.
Yeah.
Do you want to read number 6?
Sure. Any deeper thoughts on Timothy McVeigh / Oklahoma City? The lesser Timothy Cleary. Clearly, I guess he's talking about Timothy Leary.
Leary, of course.
So
Well, talk about Program to Kill. Program to Bomb. I mean, I think this is another one. Yeah, we might punt a little bit because I think we definitely would want to do an episode on this whole saga at one point because it does involve a lot of these like very slippery questions about people that were in the military that go off and do crazy shit and then get executed for being terrorists and all that stuff. I think there's a lot of sus things going on with McVeigh. I mean, how much do you know about it? Do you remember it, by the way? Do you remember it happening?
A little bit.
Where were you on that day? I forget when it was, actually. It was...
I don't know if I was, sapient at the time. When did it happen? I think that it happened
actually, April 19th, 1995, a day before Hitler's birthday.
1995 it was, so...
Yeah, 95.
So, I would have been, at the time, 6. So, I don't really remember.
I guess I was a little older, so I do remember it happening and it being, a big deal. And then they caught this psycho. I remember when they executed him in 2001, right before 9/11. Kind of really a passing of the torch of the terrorism thing, Got him out of the way right before 9/11. And, his execution was carried out a considerably shorter time than most inmates awaiting the death penalty. So they really wanted to just get him out of there,
Yeah, well, he had a bunch of, I mean, it's not, super unusual for someone, in his position to lodge such complaints, or especially with someone of his sort of political alignment and beliefs, such as like, I think he was like a Turner Diaries guy, like going by sort of his the official line on him, and I think probably that is true. But yeah, he did have some interesting ideas that he floated. Like, I think that he said that he had gotten like an anal probe from the military.
Right? Yeah.
Like
a lot of weird things he said about, because he did go through. He served in the Gulf War, and then aspired to join the Special Forces, much like another American hero, Edward Snowden. Went into Special Forces training, but allegedly washed out on the second day of his 21-day assessment, and then was honorably discharged. I don't know where he said he was anal probed by the government, but there was a lot of. Oh yeah, here it was. Yeah, he complained. When he was visiting friends after being in the Army in Decker, Michigan, he reportedly complained the Army had implanted a microchip into his butt so the government could keep track of him. And yeah, I don't know. He was an incel. He became an obsessive gambler. And I guess, I don't know. It seems like he got really mad for the government coming after him for like back taxes, and went down this path. He drove down to Waco during the siege to show his support and distributed pro-gun rights literature and bumper stickers. Yeah, that is very sus, that he's just like happens to show up like to this like complete honeypot of like FBI and ATF activity and is like, hey guys,
well,
like
that was part of his motive, right? Like, according to him, was that it was like sort of vengeance for Waco. That was like kind of what he was.
That's the exoteric official narrative of why he did what he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think there's so much more. There's a few different ways of like that people have looked at McVeigh differently. One is that he was some kind of like undercover army person that was maybe, I don't know, kind of either, if not MK'd, then like sheep dipped into the sort of patriot movement, and was kind of like Oswald was like running around doing stuff as a kind of like undercover person for the government, but then maybe got set up to be this terrorist and things like that. That's one way that people look at him. And I guess the other way would be that he was like maybe consciously going undercover, or he was like some kind of MK'd, like program to kill subject. I guess those are the two things I'm getting at. So in either way, he's a suspicious character, and he's one of these guys that like shows up and starts just talking about how much he wants to shoot down the government black helicopters, and does anybody know where I can get like a Stinger missile? Like that kind of guy. That's what it kind of sounds like. Yeah, and he spent a lot of time in Elohim City, which I think was a kind of like white nationalist, like patriot compound
Elohim
in
City.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I believe Elohim City. Yeah, Elohim City, which is in Oklahoma, and was the home of the Christian identity movement, which was kind of like a quasi-Nazi sort of
is like a name of God or an attribute of God, and
and they also had ties to the Order, which was one of the most like nefarious underground kind of neo-Nazi organizations in the 1980s, and they did a lot of armed robberies, and then they murdered Alan Berg, the Jewish radio talk show host in Denver, in 1984. That's kind of what they're most famous for.
It's like a big hub for like all sorts of insane like white supremacists, like Christian identity type maniacs.
Exactly. And there was another guy. This is the like I said, we'll probably do a really deep dive one day. But there's one person that like doesn't ever pop up. I might have mentioned him before. I don't even think he like pops up in Timothy McVeigh's Wikipedia article, which is kind of ridiculous. But there was a German guy who's an associate of Timothy McVeigh's and was the former head of security for Elohim City, a guy named Andreas Karl Strassmeyer. And basically the thing about him is that he was traipsing around the United States in the 80s and 90s, and he just so happened, he was from Germany, And from a family, this is quite a loaded statement, known for its right-wing nationalist sympathies. I wonder what that could mean. He was the son of Gunther Strassmayer, the chief of staff to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and his grandfather was also a co-founder of the Nazi Party. So he had served in the German army in the 70s into the 80s, and for some reason joined the British Welsh Guard, and then moved to Washington, D.C. to pursue a career with the U.S. Department of Justice. According to Strassmayer, he had hoped to work for the operations section of the Drug Enforcement Administration so that, Klaus Barbie's cocaine shipments would get intercepted. His efforts to obtain a career within the federal government were aided by Vincent Petrusky, a retired U.S. Air Force colonel who had apparently met Strassmayer's father while he, Petrusky, was stationed in Berlin. In interviews, Strassmayer has referred to Vincent Petrusky as, quote, a former CIA guy my father had known. Petrusky confirms he had assisted Andreas Strassmayer in finding such a job, but denies having any connection to the CIA. Strassmayer moved to, where else? Houston, Texas in 1986, where he started working as a salesman for a computer company. During this time, he became involved with the Texas Light Infantry Militia before eventually getting expelled due to speculation from members that Strassmayer was a government agent. Afterwards, he became active in right-wing and neo-Nazi circles, where he eventually met his future attorney, Kirk Lyons. He also claimed to spend some time in Knoxville, Tennessee, where he obtained a state driver's license. I guess in 1991, his lawyer, Kirk Lyons, introduced him to Elohim City. A year later, Strassmayer moved there and became the chief of security and weapons training. According to Lyons, Strassmayer hoped to marry an Elohim City woman and gain permanent resident status in the United States. He struck a friendship there with Michael William Brescia, a member of the Aryan Republican Army, and also worked as while working as a confidential informant for the ATF, Elohim City resident Carol Howe informed her agency handler about Andreas Strassmayer and how he would frequently talk about, quote, blowing up federal buildings and using, quote, direct action against the U.S. government. At the time, Carol Howe was unaware of Strassmayer's full name and simply knew him as Andy the German. And after the OKC bombing, Strassmayer fled the compound with fellow Elohim City residents Pete and Tony Ward. It does say here that Timothy McVeigh telephoned Elohim City just minutes after he had reserved the Ryder rental van that was used to blow up the Alfred P. Murrah federal building. And the phone was answered by Joan Millar, the daughter of Robert G. Miller, the founder. And I guess, so there's a relationship with McVeigh. Nobody knows. Information with various sources regarding the relationship between the two tend to conflict with one another, making it difficult to determine such an aspect. However, it is known that Andreas Strassmayer and Timothy McVeigh first met at a gun show in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1993. Robert Miller quickly expelled Andreas Strassmayer from Elohim City. Soon after, he became aware the FBI was looking at Strassmayer for possible ties to McVeigh in the bombing. And last but not least, notes from a 1997 FBI investigation state that sometime after the bombing, CIA pilot Dave Halloway flew Andreas Strassmayer out of the United States. While that same report records that Strassmayer was flown to Berlin, many have speculated he was instead flown to Mexico. However, in a letter to the McCurtain Gazette from Strassmayer's attorney, Kirk Lyons, he says his client's sudden departure from the U.S. was aided by members of Germany's elite counterterrorism unit, GSG-9. So that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
So there's like a West German grandson of a founder of the Nazi Party whose dad was like Helmut Kohl's chief of staff, traipsing around, like hanging out with CIA agents, trying to work for the Department of Justice, for the DEA in like drug interception, and then like hanging out at this Nazi compound and being like the chief of security, maybe being a federal informant, and then like piecing out either with the help of the CIA or the GSG-9 right after the attacks. I don't know, kind of doesn't look good, right? Like going off about like blowing up federal buildings and stuff, you know? Mm-hmm. Like by the, I do remember Carol Howe was like the one informant that was like around that was able to kind of, actually she, I guess, she's classified as like a key figure in Oklahoma City bombing conspiracy theories, following her claim that she informed authorities of a right-wing extremist plan to blow up a federal building in Oklahoma a few months before the Oklahoma City bombing. So, like, okay, so you had like the informant basically saying that yeah, that this was going to happen. Very much like how before the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, that one of the FBI's informants found out about this plan and told his FBI handlers very insistently that they were going to set off a bomb at the bottom of the World Trade Center. And they're like, oh, very interesting. All right, yeah. And then like a month later, the bomb went off. And he was like, what the fuck? Like, you know what I mean? So,
yeah,
you know, it really, I mean, of course, we know that there's no such thing as a conspiracy with more than 50 people. That's ontologically completely impossible and never happens. Yes. But, you know, it's interesting to see how you do have all these informants who often, I don't know, seem like, well, it makes sense, right? Like if you're an informant and you catch wind of something that's going to be like a really big deal, for one, you're probably afraid that if you don't tell your FBI handlers that something might blow back on you if you knew something about it and didn't say anything. But it's funny to see how often the exact opposite kind of ends up happening, where it's like these FBI handlers or whoever seem almost inconvenienced and pissed off that you're coming to them, like telling them about an impending attack, particularly if it happens. Then they really don't want to fucking hear about it, right? Mm-hmm. You know, so I think that there's a lot of, I don't know, weirdness here.
One interesting thing with Timothy McVeigh is the Area 51 connection.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Apparently he would go out there in the same way that he was like, you know, hanging out around Waco. You know, he would also go out to Area 51, and there's a famous story, or a relatively well-known story of him going out there and like, you know, kind of camping out and then seeing a Black Hawk helicopter. And it is kind of unusual that he was able to just like ignore all the like deadly force signs and just hang out there. And like it says that he approached some of the rent-a-cops and just was like, hi, and they like ignored him and everything.
Wow.
You know, and then he even you know, he stopped, turned around, looked at the chopper approaching in the distance. Unperturbed, he resumed his hike. The sound of the chopper blades told him that the craft was coming up close. Still, he advanced, refusing to be intimidated by the chopper as it passed overhead and swooped in low, hovering in the air 30 yards in front of him. For an instant, he considered taking cover and shooting at the helicopter with his rifle. But he wasn't in a combat mode, not yet. He knew the whole point of sending out a chopper was to frighten him. Most people, he knew, would have been scared out of their wits by a chopper flying that close. But McVeigh merely raised his free hand and waved to the chopper's crew, taking a little slap at authority. The craft hovered for a second longer, then pitched back and left. McVeigh hiked to the top of the hill and snapped his photographs. Later, as he drove away from Area 51, the white Jeep, which he had seen earlier, fell in behind his car. He was certain that the rent-a-cops were running a license plate check on him. No matter, he had accomplished his mission, challenging the government's authority and satisfying his curiosity in one fell swoop. He found no evidence of UFOs, but his interest in unidentified flying objects never flagged. Years later, on death row, he would watch the movie Contact 6 times over a 2-day period. Fascinated by the scientist played by Jodie Foster, who makes contact with an outer space alien in the image of her long-dead father. It's very
that's
odd
also
that he was
another
able to, like, infiltrate... It's odd that
also,
he was the John Hinckley situation.
Well, John Hinckley, for sure. Yeah, it's just like all of them are obsessed with Jodie Foster.
Walk onto Area 51 and nothing bad happened to him. But there's a little bit more, actually, because Michael Fortier, who like eventually was like, you know, convicted of like not warning people about what Timothy McVeigh was planning, his like old army buddy, he told the FBI that in February 1995, while on their way back to Kingman from gun shows in Nevada and Utah, he and McVeigh made 2 trips to Area 51, one in the middle of the night and the second trip in the day. Fortier said in the second trip they saw an older man with a young boy going to Area 51, and later McVeigh sent him pictures he'd taken on one of his solo excursions there. A different and perhaps more important story about McVeigh's trips. This is from Aberration in the Heartland of the Real.
Oh, yes. I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot about this book.
Yes.
It's got some good stuff in it.
Yeah, the author writes, Kevin Nicholas, a friend of McVeigh's in Michigan, told this story. He described McVeigh as a wanderer who would get a job out west in Arizona and Nevada for 6 months or so, quit, return to Michigan, then leave again. This pattern continued from 1993 to 1995, during which McVeigh found time to attend major gun shows with the country, selling guns under one of many aliases he used, Tim Tuttle being the only one Nicholas could remember. While on the road, McVeigh sometimes called Nicholas, and while a guest at Nicholas's house, made several long-distance calls, but would never use a cordless telephone, believing that the frequency could be intercepted. Nicholas advised the FBI that if they wanted to find John Doe number 2, they should look near the Nevada-Arizona border, as McVeigh had told him that he and others whose identities Nicholas did not know, had a stockpile of guns, ammunition, and survival supplies stashed in a desert near Area 51. Yeah, and apparently he went to arrange a meeting with a guy near Area 51 for a gun deal, who he suspected was either FBI or ATF. And he didn't respond to the letter directly, but he went to the predetermined place stated in the letter and through binoculars watched to see who arrived, but I guess no one came.
Yeah, just so much shady business going on with all these gun dealers and these like patriot groups, and there's like ATF informant. ATF was really on like a weird like tear in the 90s of like, remember, I mean, maybe you were a little bit too young to remember that, but like I remember it even being like a big joke in the Beavis and Butthead movie in like 94 95, and I think Bill Clinton actually makes Beavis and Butthead like honorary ATF agents, and they're like, oh cool, like alcohol, tobacco, firearms, like cool.
Yeah,
you
right.
know?
I do remember this from the Beavis and Butthead movie, and they're excited because they think that like involves like doing those things, or like you know, like playing with
exactly. And so it's a little bit like odd that maybe like the Waco thing and the ATF and everything else kind of like blackened their name a little bit, and you know, a lot of people didn't like the ATF, but then I guess after 9/11, I mean, they're still around, but you just never hear about them anymore. Now, I guess maybe they were folded more into like the Department of Homeland Security, so now you'd hear more about DHS, but still, it's like, yeah, just such a weird, spooky milieu. And I guess, you know, McVeigh did do an interview with 60 Minutes in 2000, and I guess had an opportunity to explain himself before he was executed. And I'm just looking through it right now, you know, talking about the Gulf War. He said, I went over there hyped up just like everyone else. What I experienced, though, was an entirely different ballgame. And being face-to-face close with these people in personal contact, you realize they're just people like you. He also did claim that he had been ordered to execute, like, surrendering prisoners, like, during the invasion of Iraq in, like, 1991, and that he was, like, horrified by this, which is, I don't know, something you don't hear about. I guess he got mad because of Ruby Ridge in 92. He did not say he was innocent of the bombing in Oklahoma City. He says, I came to terms with my mortality in the Gulf War. I guess in a 1997 interview, he refused to say if he was the bomber or knew who he was. And then he was asked if it is acceptable to use violence against the government, to which McVeigh said, if government is the teacher, violence would be an acceptable option. What did we do to Sudan? What did we do to Afghanistan? Belgrade? What are we doing with the death penalty? It appears they use violence as an option all the time. Hard to disagree with that right there.
Yes.
Like more woke than Bernie Sanders was in the 90s, I guess. Like more concerned with like bombing Belgrade than Bernie was. So asked if he would do anything differently if he could relive his life, McVeigh said, I thought about that quite a few times. I think anybody in life says, I wish I could have gone back and done this differently, done that differently. There are moments, but not one that stands out. Okay. Oh, and you know, he did have a neighbor on the cell block in Colorado, and who was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. And McVeigh said about him, this is kind of interesting what McVeigh says about Kaczynski is, quote, far left, while he is far right politically. Quote, I found that, in a way that I didn't realize, that we were much alike in that all we ever wanted, or all we wanted out of life, was the freedom to live our own lives however we chose to. So he sees a lot in common with Ted Kaczynski, the MKUltra subject.
Pioneer of horseshoe theory.
Yeah, I don't know if I would always say that, like, I mean, I guess, like, I don't know if, like, I don't know if Kaczynski is really far left. I guess in terms of being like an extreme anarcho-primitivist, maybe. But yeah. So, I don't know. There's just a lot. I think it sounds like he was cagey up until maybe his final interview with actually saying that he did it. Yeah, but that's something we could probably explore.
Something interesting I stumbled upon in this is a suggestion. It's in this book, Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. This talks a little about Timothy McVeigh, and it has an interesting theory that, relating to something that we've talked about a little bit before, the Nephilim. It talks about the popularity of the doctrine of the Nephilim among these Christian identity groups. And it kind of suggests that, maybe this doctrine is something that's been cooked up by intelligence agencies to manipulate these types of groups. I guess Paul D. Collins and Philip D. Collins may be two brothers or something, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. But they suggest that, they said the Oklahoma City bombing provides compelling evidence that criminalized portions of the government and intelligence community, as we've just talked about, have periodically used useful idiots in the Christian entity subculture. The early history of Christian entity's formation also seems to suggest that the belief system is little more than a synthetic theological construct carefully crafted to turn people of faith into fanatics that can be manipulated. There are strange and disturbing similarities between Christian identity and the Nephilim doctrine, with its curious assertion that Noah's survival was attributable to good genes and not righteousness. The Nephilim doctrine appears to be little more than a new strain of Christian identity that incorporates elements of exotheology. Like Christian identity, the Nephilim doctrine has its ties with intelligence circles. The theory's main proponent, the deceased evangelical Missler, possessed a background in intelligence work. Missler's old online biography states that he served as a senior analyst with a nonprofit think tank where he conducted projects for the intelligence community and the Department of Defense. Missler's participation in the CNP also provided him with the opportunity to rub shoulders with other people involved in intelligence. Oliver North, John Singlaub, Richard Geary are just some of the CNP participants who also inhabit intelligence circles.
This is the Council for National Policy, right?
Yeah, and
that's it.
Right.
They're a very, I know, like Recluse on the Farm podcast has talked a lot about CNP as kind of the like right wing. I think we might even get into it when we do our Yankee and Cowboy War episode next, about how, like, if the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission are kind of the prevailing think tanks of the Yankees, then the CNP is that equivalent for like the Southwestern sort of cowboy faction of the ruling class. And they're influential, but you never hear about them. They're very low key.
Yeah, this seems like an interesting line on the whole giant concept. The idea that it's something that's emanates from groups like this. It's sort of a combination of intelligence circles and theosophy.
Makes me think about those 1 star and 2 stars that are telling you to keep your eyes fixed on the sky.
Eyes fixed on the. It's the biggest thing we've ever dealt with.
If the shoe fits,
this
it also
giant stuff that you and your friend are onto.
Oh, what was the last thing I was gonna say? It also. I remember now. Yeah. Yes, I remember. Okay, this reminded me of that very weird warning that William Colby gave to John DeCamp that he relayed in his book from the early 90s. This is like maybe just a couple years before he mysteriously died, but he kind of said, like, your next big investigation, John, after this whole Franklin scandal thing should be the Patriot movement. They are the greatest national security threat to us right now. They are incredibly dangerous, and you need to get the word out that, I'm pretty sure he was saying it in a negative way about these like militias and stuff like that, that they were some kind of like, I don't know, fascist fifth column that was extremely nefarious and needed to be stopped. But the way he even was saying it kind of had this vibe of like, oh, they're gonna do an Oklahoma City bombing any day now, John. So like, you better go look at them because don't they seem dangerous to you? Just if you think about them as kind of like feds from the jump that were used for some kind of purpose, or like corralling these like useful idiots into doing terrorist attacks, and like this weird Nazi is there, or like getting everybody juiced up about it. Then like, what was Bill Colby up to? Kind of like pointing it out so early as like, John, like this is going to be, because it did end up being like the biggest sensational threat of like the mid 90s was like these crazy groups out there. And I mean, some of them were Nazis, some of them were crazy, but there's also like so much federal infiltration of these groups that it really kind of makes you wonder.
Well, it's interesting. Like, I was just thinking about, because I was looking up, I was trying to track down like the source of the like, I can't feel God, they've killed God, my soul is dead, like vaccine story recently, and I came across one of the oldest sources for that I could find was a YouTube video from one of the Bundys, And it kind of reminds me of that, how there still really are these things like Elohim City, where there are these like sort of fringe groups that, are kind of in their own self-contained community. And then like it becomes this bizarre, like huge media storm, like, but at the same time, like nothing really happens, like, and it just kind of continues, and like they just gain more visibility, and they become like a way to perpetuate ideas further, like like they become like a hub in a larger network, like by virtue of having had this sort of like performative exchange. I don't know, like I haven't really
the
taken,
Bundy
like,
thing always
Kobe's
struck
advice,
me
and,
as just like a kind of media spectacle with like these dumbasses who were. I always did think it was interesting that they were like their big enemy wasn't the ATF but BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and then how seamlessly the fear and the hatred of BLM like within it was like the same year that BLM became a kind of social movement, and then they started just using BLM as the abbreviation for both, and like then I don't know, there's like the weird subconscious conflation of these two things being like two heads of the same hydra. It's all just BLM, they're just trying to take your land, teach you critical race theory, and
critical race theory, yes.
So I don't know, I think this definitely merits like a very deep dive, this aberration in the heartland of the real. So I think we'll put it on the list and get to it.
I'm appointing you honorary agents in the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms.
Whoa. Alcohol and tobacco? Yeah. Firearms.
Cool, huh?
Cigarettes and beer kick ass. Yeah. We're in the Bureau of Beer and Fire. And cigarettes. And maybe some chicks, too. This is gonna be cool.
I miss the Russians, I miss Vietnam. Snafu and unforeseen flaws in the plan. I miss Nixon, I miss Agnew and Paul. I am a steward, I am shackled and born. I miss Castro, I miss the Chinese. I miss sympathetic fascist regimes. I miss the future that we had in the past. Miss knowing that this day could be my last. Yeah, with the ATF mopping up what's left in the promised land where we are living. 'Cause with the ATF mopping up what's left, the machine we built still needs feet.
All right, let's move on to number 7 from Peter Darkwinter. He asks, would like to hear the host take on the alleged death of Michael Ayatollah Mike D'Andrea, who, according to the Iranian press, was one of the passengers on a plane that crashed in Afghanistan in January 2020. I've always found this guy interesting because of all the talk in mainstream news about his, quote, conversion to Islam, his portrayal as the wolf in Zero Dark 30, and also the rumors that this guy might not even exist IRL. Thanks.
I haven't heard the rumors of his non-existence, although I do remember that he was like a very surreptitious figure, for a while. Reports about him would always be under an alias, I remember the article about him as Roger,
Yeah,
I guess there is. I don't actually recall how he was portrayed in Zero Dark 30. Like, I haven't seen that movie in like a really long time, and I wasn't really paying very close attention the first time I saw it. Like I kind of knew what to expect from Zero Dark 30. I feel like I caught it on TV or something at some point. Like, I definitely have seen parts of it, but I don't remember like if he's seen like, being this pious Muslim. Like, my read in this guy is like not that he's like a super sincere like ideological convert to Islam. Like, it just seems like his wife is Muslim, and in order to marry her, like it's like if anyone is like any kind of even close to a conservative Muslim, it's usually like the tradition like is that men who are non-Muslim are not permitted to marry Muslim women. So he would have had to like perfunctorily convert in order to marry his wife, who I think is some rich like
Yeah. I was just going into her. Farida Kurimji Dandrea is the daughter of a wealthy Muslim family from Mauritius, with Gujarati origins, and is the senior director of Karimji Group, a business conglomerate owned by her family with holdings including print media, telecommunications, real estate, tourism, financial services, and energy. So it sounds kind of like controls like the commanding heights of the economy. Yeah, that's very interesting.
So like the whole idea, and like I've read like little articles about this guy, and like no one says that he like prays or anything, which is pretty much like the bare minimum.
Well,
for,
he is shown in Zero Dark 30. They people made a lot of hay out of that basically like there's little cutaways to him like rolling his prayer rug out in his office and like closing the door and like praying after he's just like ordered a drone strike. It's like it's so complex. He was apparently really like the godfather of the U.S. drone program.
And, like, the mystique of like but like I'm sure that he isn't like in any like obviously Hassan al-Than like he's Muslim insofar as he's said, but like there's sometimes instrumental reasons why people become like Muslim.
Like John Brennan and converting in Jeddah. It's
right, of course, as we all know. Well, no, but that's completely different because he truly believes in the ideology of Wahhabism and he's committed to bringing it about.
Like any true Jesuit pupil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's actually Muslim.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out real quick so I don't forget.
His chillingly perfect Arabic when he says like "Salam alaikum."
I just wanted to point out because I feel like this is slightly important because something just went off in my brain, and the thing about Mauritius that is interesting and relevant is that what's not very far from that island is Diego Garcia, which is a very high level. I think a formerly kind of a British naval base that is now American and has been. I'm pretty sure people there. I think there might have been a CIA black site on Diego Garcia, or it was like a transit point to like trade off people that had been detainees or whatever. And I do remember one of the spicier conspiracy theories around the MH370 disappearance is that it was like remotely hijacked and flown to Diego Garcia, and then I don't know, everybody was killed or whatever. But it's a very spooky, high level island. So anybody that's like plugged in to the power elite of Mauritius is necessarily gonna be in close proximity to Diego Garcia. So very savvy move to marry like one of the wealthiest people in that country that maintain that I don't think they have ownership. It's basically been given to the United States, but that's the closest nation to it, I believe, in the Chagos archipelago.
And I'm sure that definitely like that her family business is like all up in like all the sus aspects of like the U.S. presence in Mauritius.
High level U.S. bomber base, and pretty.
Like I'm sure her businesses like.
Here we go. This is relevant. Yeah, there was a rendition flight refueling admission. Several groups claim the military base in Diego Garcia has been used by the U.S. government for transport of prisoners involved in the controversial extraordinary rendition program, which Mike D'Andrea was like intimately involved in leading. An allegation formally reported to the Council of Europe in 2007. In 2008, British Foreign Secretary David Miliband admitted that 2 United States extraordinary rendition flights refueled on Diego Garcia in 2002 and was, quote, very sorry that earlier denials were having to be corrected. I guess some other stuff came out with in WikiLeaks during the Cablegate stuff. Also, Diego Garcia was used as a storage section for U.S. cluster bombs as a way of avoiding UK parliamentary oversight. So, the whole island is basically a black site, I think it's safe to say. So I mean, there's that about him. As for him dying in January of 2020, I mean, it's true that Iran did claim that.
But, Iran was in a difficult position where, like, one of their national heroes was murdered and, or killed as an act of war, whatever you want to say. Obviously very aggressive, like, performative act. Yeah, so they kind of were kind of smarting from that and wanting to claim a bounty of comparable size. So I think that maybe that that would be one reason why they would claim that this had happened if it hadn't. I don't know. I feel like it hasn't been confirmed or denied either way at present, unless you found something else.
It hasn't, and yeah, I mean, also Iranian news, I don't know for sure if this is true, but it really wouldn't surprise me that D'Andrea was like the person who directed the operation that killed Soleimani. So this would have been kind of direct retaliation. But yeah, I found an Atlantic Council
article. Well, he was like put in charge of like this. Iran policy, like when Trump came in.
Trump brought him in.
They moved this guy onto to head up their Iran policy. So I mean, yeah, he would definitely be culpable in a large way for that. So it would be definitely it was written about in the New York Times in 2017.
It mentions that he's known as the Dark Prince or Ayatollah Mike. He killed thousands of people in the CIA's drone campaign, was a real pioneer of signature strikes where it's like, we're tracking this phone number. We think it's connected to a terrorist. Let's blow it up. And he did a lot. So then Trump brought him in, this liberal hero, this woke CIA badass who, was a Muslim, but also killed Osama bin Laden. The Orange Man brought him in as pinch hitter to conduct his like Peter Schweizer-esque maximum pressure campaign.
I mean, like, is it like, I guess it's woke to kill bin Laden because Obama like was president at the time, but like it's just the idea like, oh, he's Muslim. It's like so absurd. Like, sorry.
Yeah,
like,
no, like, it was. Like, and that's how the movie portrayed it as like, whoa,
so lame.
So complex.
Yeah, like. Stupid.
He's also it is funny because he's now credited as the New York Times said perhaps no single CIA official is more responsible for weakening Al-Qaeda, but also he was reportedly one of the CIA officials who, I'm going to put heavy air quotes on this, failed to track one of the 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hamzi. And then, of course, like threw himself into the enhanced interrogation program right after 9/11. His team oversaw the interrogations of Abu Zubaydah, Abdul Rahim al-Nashiri, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I think we brought up Abu Zubaydah before, and that is interesting. I always thought that was interesting because it's like the very people like Alfreda Bukowski and this asshole who did things that like made pretty big kind of unforced errors that led to the government not catching the 9/11 hijackers, immediately are put in charge of going and like kidnapping and torturing these high-level Al-Qaeda people. And from what it sounds like, basically just torturing the hell out of them, breaking them down psychologically, and then producing God knows what in terms of intelligence. So I'm just saying, let me be a little critical paranoid here. If you were involved in the thing, whether you wanted 9/11 to happen or not, if you were from a position of, I fucked up in a huge way and my career could be maybe over or something like that, or if it comes out like the systemic level of negligence that the U.S. government engaged in to like let 9/11 happen, and now you have basically authorization to do whatever crazy torture techniques that you basically have in the toolkit, and it's totally gloves off. Like, would you be torturing those people to get the truth, or would you be maybe torturing them until they provide a truth that you find suitable?
Right.
Like, it's basically forcing a narrative, because then, we have to think about like the compartmentalization of the government and everything. It's not like everybody's just sitting around like, like we made 9/11 happen. Good. There's a lot of people that are like normies, basically, that like need to be given sort of cooked up information to justify whatever it is they want to do. So it would be like, all right, Abu Zubaydah, like, we're going to lock you in this box. We're going to blast the Barney song 24 hours a day. We're maybe going to try to hypnotize you. We're going to inject you with sodium pentothal, whatever the fuck we want to do. Every MK Ultra Phoenix program thing we could ever think of, we're going to do it to you until you give us the story that we want you to give us. And that is when the torture will stop. Because there is a kind of false thing sometimes with torture that was very popular in the 2000s and the 2010s with like liberals when they were criticizing in the media and just liberal politicians and stuff, is they would always bring up, this is the ultimate way to like own the Cheneyites and the neocons, would say, well, actually, if you torture somebody, the information you get is very inaccurate, because when somebody is being tortured, they'll tell you whatever you want to make the torture stop. And of course, that's true, but I feel like they drew the wrong inference from that. They should have focused more on they'll tell you whatever you want to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
Like no shit. That's the point. That's why they're torturing them, is because like if they're not torturing them, they might just say nothing or just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, give me my lawyer. And they had to make it clear, like, no, there's no lawyers here. We're gonna torture you, and we're gonna like break down, whatever submission for whatever reason, whether you did 9/11 or not. We're gonna torture you until you say the thing we want you to say. And then that's going to go in the records and the intelligence reports, and all the politicians and the bureaucrats are going to read that, and then that's going to convince them. So it's like, this is a potentially, this is an important link in the chain of like evidence to basically manufacture to get the whole war on terror thing rolling. And this guy was basically in charge of all of it. And the fact that he too, just like Alfredo Bukowski, totally messed up and was like, oops, like, oh man, just like didn't track this, hijacker that was getting checks from Prince Bandar's wife, oops.
Seems like and he has a history of messing up, like, too, just reading about some of his stuff. Apparently he was at the helm of the CIA's he was a counterterrorism chief, and he
the CTC
did a lot, as we mentioned, or as you mentioned, to like escalate the drone war and everything. But he also oversaw like the deadliest attack on CIA personnel in more than a quarter century, when a source who was secretly working for Al-Qaeda blew himself up at an American base in Afghanistan.
That was, of course, dramatized in Zero Dark 30. It was a big source of consternation and frustration. The poor heroes were almost... they almost just, brought them home and said, don't look for Bin Laden anymore, because you guys, somebody died, and we're all going to blame you, and it's not fair, but we're doing that. Yeah, very moving passage.
I just remember the Oscars that year was like literally like a fucking CIA like pageant.
I think that was a big coming out moment. Not to say the CIA wasn't deeply involved in Hollywood before that, but that was a real coming out party for the CIA. And you saw like not long after that, you saw Homeland, which we forgot to mention, I think, the last time we brought it
Homeland
up.
Homeland is another like white, like the mystique of the white Muslim.
And also
fascinating idea.
Also, like the really important thing about Homeland, it's an Israeli show originally. It was brought over here, it was adapted from an Israeli show.
Makes a bit more sense in that context, but
it does.
Whatever.
But
into American fantasias and ideas as well.
Well, exactly. And while it had a very almost like Scandal-esque first couple seasons that I think really wrote people in with like the sexy drama of Carrie,
the love
like
story is the most interesting part.
But once they had Iran like absurdly execute Brody, sorry, spoiler alert, in season 3, that show kind of overhauled it. Right.
Sergeant Brody,
a true comrade.
Mujahid Congressman, Sergeant Brody.
Almost detonated the vest in like the presence of Cheney, but didn't.
You should have done it.
No, but like,
the suicide
but after
he got from the terrorist operative, like in Gettysburg. That's kind of like Timothy McVeigh going out to do his gun deal outside Area 51, like just getting But anyway,
made for TV. But but I think after like maybe season 3 of that show, probably around like 2013, 2014, especially when like the Syria and ISIS thing kicked up, that show basically overhauled itself into basically just being like a CIA propaganda hour. That was, and I remember there were all these reports, like they didn't even have to hide it anymore. Basically, it's like the producers and the writers of and
and Claire Danes were basically kind of boasting about how cool it was that like the CIA invited them to Langley and they got to meet with like real CIA officers in the counterterrorism center who let them know like what the real threats were that were going on, like what keeps them up at night, you know. And then of course it's like, oh yeah, and I'm sure they told you exactly what they want you to think that is like super important. And you know, you could just feel that like devil's bargain being struck, and that show just like really, not that it was like, oh, it was like amazing like before, but it really degenerated into just this like ridiculous like really, like Tom
really
Clancy for libs, basically.
Was like, okay, yeah, it was, and that was a time when and we're rapidly being sucked back into it, like the Zero Dark 30 era of like you know, base CIA. I mean, it really never went away, but like there was maybe like a sense of vigilance like on the part of like the libs, but they really like have gone back to brunch with an aggressiveness that like defies comprehension. And
I think a lot of liberals like the drone program. They have a deep
psychological need. Yeah, exactly. They have a deep psychological need to like love this. It just has caused them like itchiness in their heads for like, you know, a whole 4 years, and like now they're like really needing to go back to just like loving the CIA and like trusting everything that like, you know, the base invisible president does. And, the glorious military industrial complex under his steady hand.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and you know, it's like all the same all the same people that were torturing people and droning people and like failing to prevent 9/11 are now like senior level officials at the CIA, and they persist like between Democratic and Republican, even through, you know, the Drumpf man. This guy was getting promoted because it's like he's a bloodthirsty killer and, you know, shares the desire to like, you know, destroy Iran. And he joined in 1979, so this must be. He joined the CIA in 1979, so this must be very like foundational to his kind of CIA career and how he sees himself. Is like, I think he also assassinated a Hezbollah leader in Damascus in maybe like 2004. So he's got Imad Mughniya in Damascus. So he's got a long running beef kind of with Hezbollah and Iran and stuff like that. So he's, you know, a piece of shit. And
it's interesting that Iran used a like screen capture from Zero Dark 30 in claiming that they had killed this guy.
Really?
They're like, we killed Ayatollah Moak, and they used a picture of Frederick Lane, or the guy who played, you know, the Wolf. You know?
Yeah, they have pictures of him.
To be
now,
fair, he does look the part of like a menacing CIA agent much better than the actual Ayatollah Mike, who's like a paunchy, like, you know, nerd. You don't like, you know, he does look like a worthy adversary for like the Islamic Republic, much more than, you know, the actual Ayatollah Mike. He has the sort of masculinity of Soleimani, you know, like you wouldn't want to think that this was the guy who killed Soleimani, you know, if you see the real Ayatollah Mike. You know, Soleimani being like a very virile figure. It fits much better if the movie version of him, you know.
Yeah. So I don't know. I assume he's alive, unfortunately.
He may well be alive.
I think there was a plane that crashed. I don't know if, as initially claimed, the Taliban shot it down, or if it was just like a mechanical failure, or the CIA was like wiping out some of its own assets. But I guess apparently Voice of America, I think, said 4 or 5 people died in the small plane crash, but they won't say anything about Michael D'Andrea. And yeah, I don't know. We'll keep an eye out for him.
It's interestingly convenient that like his identity was like a whole secret, and now like it's come out, but now he's like ambiguously dead, and like no one will confirm or deny. It's kind of like convenient in a way. Yeah,
exactly. And he also the last thing I just want to say is like I noticed that I think he got some criticism. Well, I guess as the founder of the CIA drone program, he was probably responsible for killing a number of American citizens who had, you know, either joined Al-Qaeda, or in the case of Abdurrahman al-Awlaki, just happened to be the son of probably a CIA asset that they wanted to get rid of. And so they killed him with a drone in Yemen when he was like, I think 15. That was
one of the greatest hits from the Obama era. But one of the other people that he killed in 2015 in Waziristan that he was, I guess, very adamant about hunting down. I didn't know about this guy, but he fits a certain pattern. This is Adam Gadon, born Adam Perlman in Oregon in 1978, who was an American senior operative, cultural interpreter, spokesman, and media advisor for Al-Qaeda. I guess he showed up in 2004 in a bunch of Al-Qaeda videos as Azam the American, or Al-Amriki. He grew up in Southern California, and what I didn't know about him is that he moved to... Of course, he grew up... His grandfather was a prominent Jewish activist and on the board of directors of the Anti-Defamation League, and his father was Philip, a musician who grew up in Orange County. Getting some Pynchon vibes here. His father was involved in the counterculture movement at UC Irvine, and before Adam's birth, converted to Christianity. I guess then he was raised as a Protestant. As an adolescent, he became obsessed with death metal and alternative magazines. He contributed to a music zine called Xenocide in the early 1990s.
That's I guess a reference to Ender's Game.
Maybe.
Must be. Yeah.
So then he did convert to Islam in 1995 after going to the Islamic Society of Orange County. And I guess it says here that members of Gadon's study group were young fundamentalists who, quote, targeted the mosque's chairman, Haitham Bundakji, for his practice of, quote, wearing Western clothes and being friendly with Jews. Okay, that's weird. Like, why were there, like, young fundamentalists in Orange County at this Islamic Society? That seemed, but the imam was, like, liberal. Like, you know, that's a little odd.
Yeah, well,
like you would, wouldn't you expect, like, I guess maybe if they're, I don't know, immigrants or something. I don't know. It's kind of it just seems a little mismatched. Like, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but you know,
usually the head of any congregation is like more of a traditionalist than like the kids.
He's not necessarily the imam. He's
I guess you're right. Yeah, he's the chairman
of the mosque board. So like and you know, a lot of time like young people like have different like sources of information. So yeah,
true.
It's possible there wasn't like a
he got arrested. Gadon got arrested for assaulting that guy in 1997, Haitham Bundakji, and I guess he served 2 days in jail, and then a year.
Wow.
What's that? Yeah, his former mentor. Yeah, exactly. He lashed out at him, and then failed to perform community service, and so had a warrant out on him. And then he moved to Pakistan in 1998, where he married an Afghan refugee, and then cut off contact with his family in March 2001. He told his parents he'd been working as a journalist in Pakistan.
He's very similar to John Walker Lind, actually.
Yeah.
This is basically like another John Walker Lind.
Yeah. So listen to this, because this is interesting. In a short period of time, Gadon became a senior advisor to bin Laden and was assumed to be playing the role of translator, video producer, and cultural interpreter. Gadon declared his animosity towards the U.S. by declaring it enemy soil and praising the individuals responsible for the 9/11 attacks. The first production of Al-Qaeda's media division, As-Sahab, was believed to have been in 2001 with the involvement of Gadon. He was like the auteur of those famous like Osama bin Laden communique kind of videos, and I don't know, maybe even that scary like training camp footage of them like climbing on monkey bars that everyone used like to this day. Like, I wonder if he shot that as well. And it's just
apparently his death was like confirmed partially by like the huge decline in video quality that happened.
Yes, or I think they say that his I think they say that like he became involved in other tasks, and like the video quality dropped sharply because he didn't die until 2015. But this is around the time of 9/11 where he was producing all these videos. I don't know where. I guess he was hiding out in Pakistan and like Waziristan.
Oh yeah, no, there was a rumor of his death earlier, and there was a huge drop in video quality, and that's why people I guess had thought that he had died. I see.
Yeah. But he kept producing. He kept producing videos like through the Obama era. And interestingly, in March 2014, an unpublished video was leaked by ISIS that showed Gadon condemning ISIS and calling them extremists. But he also praised the Fort Hood shooter. So in 2010, so he was like supportive of terrorism, but then I don't know, there was like a weird turf war with ISIS and Al Qaeda where I feel like, you know, the Cyclo himself, Zawahiri, like condemned them, and they were like, fuck off, we have our own caliph now. Yeah, his death was rumored a number of times, but then finally in April 2015. And, you know, that same drone strike happened to kill hostage workers Giovanni Laporto and Warren Weinstein, who were collateral
that was
damage.
Another blunder mentioned about Mike Andrea, that he, you know, had been sort of overseeing the counterterrorism.
Exactly.
When that happened,
and that whole thing kind of jumped out at me because I remember reading an article. It might have been in some mainstream thing like The Atlantic from a couple years ago, which I always meant to go and follow up more.
I feel like this guy is like a Graham Wood like article waiting to happen, where it's like he was a genius. Well, like he, you know, was the most brilliant. It might have been in the same publication. He was white, and yet he became Muslim, and he studied the true, most authentic Muslim philosophy, and realized the one fundamental truth of all Islam, that you must kill.
But I think what's interesting is that there were a few Americans who went and joined ISIS, and it's escaping me right now, that article, but there was an American who grew up in Boston. I feel like that might have been a
Graham Wood article that you're thinking of.
It might have been. It might have literally been. Yeah, but basically it was like the same exact story of like an American who grew up in Boston, and somehow he might have gone to like film school for a while, or they studied film, but then when he went over to Syria and joined ISIS, he quickly became like, he rose through the ranks immediately and became like the producer and kind of director and main auteur of their very flashy sort of snuff film propaganda videos. And that always jumped out at me, is like, because I always thought there was something just a little bit too slick about their video productions, and then the explanation is, oh yeah, they had like a young American who went over there and joined them and then directed everything. It's like, what? You know. And then there was a kid from Texas who was the son of a retired, I think, an Army colonel who grew up in Richardson, Texas, very spooked out kind of military industrial complex suburb. And same thing, just like kind of apropos of nothing, got really not just converted to Islam, but like converted to kind of ISIS style, you know, stuff, and then pieced out. And I think he bounced around to a bunch of different countries, but then he became almost like some people described him as like one of the main theological authorities in ISIS. Right. And it's like this like 33-year-old American guy. It's like, what is going on here?
That ISIS even had like any theological authorities is absurd. I feel like that's a Graham Wood thing, where it's like, this is like the true theological meditation, like of the, you know, like there's not like, you know, the whole idea that like al-Baghdadi was like an Islamic scholar. Like, okay, well, where's his dissertation? Like, that's a lie.
No,
like he's not an Islamic scholar. Yeah, like
I'm going with the Sergeant Gregory Ford exposition. I'd love to get him on the podcast one day, because he went on a few radio shows like years ago. But that's the guy that claims that, like, that he found like a bunch of Carlyle Group like nuclear bomb triggers in Iraq, and then like tried to tell his superiors about it, and then they like MK'd him and like strapped him to a gurney and injected him with sodium pentothal and like flew him out of the country. But the other thing he mentioned, because he was giving interviews,
WMDs, but they didn't.
But they were sold by the Reagan Bush administration. So like, you know what I mean? It's like they did have like a part of like a nuclear detonator, but like it had been given to them by George Bush, so it was like awkward. But like the other thing he threw in there, because it was around the time ISIS was like rampaging around, was that when he was stationed in Samarra, he ended up making contact with like the I think it was the Mukhabarat, like, you know, Saddam's intelligence service, with the station chief of Samarra, who was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi at the time. And that I think, I can't remember if he said that his cover was being an imam at like the local mosque there or something, but he was actually just a case officer who, you know, was in charge of that district. And then, you know, I think it gets a little, it doesn't tell the whole story, but when people describe ISIS as kind of like this kind of cynical alliance of like former Ba'athist like intelligence and military officers that maybe like teamed up with some local elements and got some foreign support, and then, you know, used like this kind of religious thing just as like a brand, kind of like a radical Sunni brand, but none of them were actually really religious.
I remain very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I certainly
testimony.
think that like and I'm not saying that like none of them were really religious or like ISIS isn't Islamic or whatever. Like it is neither here nor there, and like ultimately at the end of the day, like if you're ascribing Islam to yourself, like that's sufficient, and like if you affirm the Shahada and et cetera, like you count as being Muslim, you might still be like a sociopath, like a terrorist, and like you might very well like go to hell because like you're not upholding like the spirit like of the law. But as far as it goes, like of being like trying to litigate, whether this is like an Islamic group or not, like I don't think that's interesting. But it's not like, the thing that really bothered me like around the ISIS discourse is like the idea that this is some kind of like sophisticated theological product of like genuine meditation upon like Islamic texts like led by a scholar, and that like there are these brilliant American kids who are like geniuses of the Arabic language like going out there because they were just drawn in by like this perfect realization of like Islamic philosophy. It's like just so insulting, and it just shows like how these people don't know anything. And it's the same type of thing where there's like this mystique around like Ayatollah Mike. It's very similar, where it's like, like basically this over romanticization and like this mystification of Islam, where it's like inconceivable that like someone is like, how could they be Muslim but then like be it's this
we talked about that with like hypnosis and stuff. Like, how could anybody be a communist? How could anybody be Muslim without? They must be hypnotized or something. They must have been brainwashed. Like it's so inconceivable.
Islam is like equivalent to terrorism, like in some way. So therefore, it's like so impressive, and like that someone would be Muslim, but then also like be fighting terrorism. And exactly. Like, how could someone who was white, like who wasn't Muslim to begin with, possibly like find this appealing? There like must be something very mysterious and mystical going on like in the mind of this great like Sun Tzu warrior, where he can like understand the terrorist mentality, like, but he uses it for good or whatever, or
there's even kind of like
he is truly the wolf or whatever.
There's almost like a Colonel Kurtz kind of aspect to it, of like he's gone fully native, like he understands them better than anybody else. He's even become one of them. He's taken the Shahada, and now
the Shahada,
so it's like it's like that kind of thing of
like their warrior ways against them. It's like in Stargate SG-1, where they have the one guy who's like got his voice like audio doubled over, and he's like, I am one of the aliens, but I will help you, like or whatever. Like it's like just like so fucking
I know.
That's what we make of that, I guess.
Not really sure, but we got our eye on him. So okay, last question. We're doing all right here.
Last question.
Time.
Reasonable time. All right. Might be a bit late. Young Howler asks, might be a bit late with this one. Well, not too late. We're getting it in. But I was hoping you might be able to delve into the ontological/metaphysical implications of the development and deployment of the atomic bomb. This is something that's really fascinated me in the works of Pynchon and Don DeLillo, and the exploration of this theme was also what I appreciated the most in Twin Peaks: The Return. We just recently discussed this. I guess Dimitri was not as impressed, but looking forward to your Sus David Lynch episode BTW. And I'm in the beginning stages of writing a research paper on the subject, also Hegel, and would appreciate your guys' perspectives/input/considerations. Well, one thing I'd recommend that comes to mind is Derrida's lecture, No Apocalypse, Not Now, which I think actually even mentions Hegel and deals with the implications, definitely like metaphysically and ontologically, of like the nuclear deterrence, and talks about I'll see if I can bring it up, but the contemplation of nuclear annihilation as like a theme in kind of the ideascape of the time, which I think was around the late 20th century, maybe the 90s. I'll have to look it up. But I mean, in general, the development and the deployment of the atomic bomb goes hand in hand with scientific revelations around like the idea of the atom and protons and electrons and all these theories, which weren't really like observable per se at the time, as far as I know. Like, again, not a physicist, not a STEM person, but it is like a big thing where like the necessity of having this weapon was something that kind of pushed these theories and these frameworks of the makeup of the universe and based on the atom to the forefront, and caused them to become debated in a big way. I think at the time the atomic bomb was detonated, like the idea of like electrons, protons, neutrons, all these things to take for granted and like learn about in high school science class, like were not really, confirmed. They were still disputed. So the idea of this, like, of atomism, which, is a whole philosophical movement with a long lineage. You can even talk about Al-Ashari and people like that, or even atomism in the sense of Ibn Sina, people like that, or Epicurus, I think, would be a good classical proponent of it, and Lucretius on the Roman side. That might be something interesting to look into, like in terms of the history of the idea of the atom. I don't know like much about like your paper, but I feel like it might be more about like the sociological aspects of like nuclear deterrence and the idea of in which case I would definitely recommend Derrida's essay. I'll try to look it up right now, but I don't know what if you were going to say anything on that, Dimitri.
I mean, it's a real dense topic. I don't know if I have anything too specific. It is something that's fascinating and I'd like to read more about. I don't know, just on a really basic level, the most famous quote about detonating the atomic bomb from J. Robert Oppenheimer always just like jumped out at me as kind of just like a terrifying quote. Like, I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
And Gita.
Yeah.
He, on the kind of ancient aliens tip, didn't he also have some weird quote where like he said like, this is the first nuclear detonation like in modern times or whatever, which people sometimes point to as like implying that, in those classical Hindu texts, some of those. According to this article, Robert Oppenheimer, Medium, Robert Oppenheimer, the renowned theoretical physicist and mentor to countless Nobel laureates, was asked if Trinity was the first ever bomb of such a type to be detonated. He replied, yes, in modern times. Add to this what Oppenheimer quoted from the Bhagavad Gita and as clear as day, so I assume they go on to talk about how like the sort of destructive potencies and techniques used in that ascribed to the gods and such were nuclear weapons, kind of on the ancient astronauts tip. I'm trying to look up if that's a real quote, but I don't know how useful that will be. But yeah, I would definitely look up No Apocalypse Not Now, because I feel like that is, I'm looking at it right now. I guess this was 1984, summer 1984, and there was a conference convened on the topics of like nuclear criticism. It was published in Diacritics, Volume 14, Number 2, Nuclear Criticism, summer 1984, by the Johns Hopkins University Press, and Jacques Derrida has an article in there. It's very, very Derridian, hitting his old like bugbears. Let me think of what's a good taste maybe to give of this for the listeners who might not eventually go hunt it down. Although I would recommend that young Howler at least do so a little bit, because I think he does even mention Hegel in this. Total and remainderless destruction of the archive. Yes, an absolute missile does not abolish chance. Hegel on one hand sets forth the implicit consequence of Kantian criticism and recalls or postulates that one must begin explicitly with a thought about the infinite, of which Kantian criticism has indeed had to begin implicitly. On the other hand, defines access to the life of the mind and to consciousness by the passage through death, or the risk of biological, let us say natural death, through war and the struggle for recognition. He still has to hold on to that remainder of natural life which, in symbolization, makes it possible to capitalize, open parentheses, on, close parentheses, what is gained from the risk, from war, and from death itself. As individual or community, the master has to survive in order to enjoy the symbolic profit, open parentheses, in mind and in consciousness, close parentheses, from death, risks, or endured. He takes risks and he dies in the name of something which is worth more than life, but something which will still be able to bear his name in life, in a residue of living support. This is what made Bataille laugh. The master has to live on in order to cash in on and enjoy the benefits of the death risk he has risked. And he quotes like the idea of better dead than red. He says, today, in the perspective of a remainderless destruction without mourning and without symbolicity, those who contemplate launching such a catastrophe do so no doubt in the name of what is worth more in their eyes than life, better dead than red. On the other hand, those who want nothing to do with that catastrophe are ready to prefer any sort of life at all, life above all, as the only value worthy to be affirmed. But nuclear war, as a hypothesis, a phantasm of total self-destruction, can only come about in the name of that which is worth more than life, that which, giving its value to life, has greater value than life, and thus it is waged in the name of ellipsis. That, in any case, is the story that the war makers always tell. But it is in the name of something whose name, and this logic of total destruction can no longer be born, transmitted, and inherited by anything living. That name, and the name of which war would take place, would be the name of nothing. It would be pure name, the naked name. That war would be the first and the last war in the name of the name, with only the non-name of, quote, name. It would be a war without a name, a nameless war, for it would no longer share even the name of war with the other events of the same type, of the same family. Beyond all genealogy, a nameless war in the name of the name. That would be the end and the revelation of the name itself, the apocalypse of the name. I'm like cracking myself up with this. You might find something of use here. I love the sentence just repeating the word name like endlessly. When you read this out loud, you really get like, people don't treat it this way, but he's a comedian, and especially with all the, discussion of Foucault this week, generally I think Foucault as like a philosopher and a thinker, is much meatier than Derrida, but maybe Derrida is a better guy at the end of the day.
I don't know, because Derrida also signed that petition to abolish age of consent laws in France in the late 70s.
I'm not really sure. I couldn't read like the Times article, like it was paywalled out of it, so I couldn't read like if there was new information. But Derrida, as far as we know, didn't like rape a bunch of like Tunisian boys, and while he had AIDS, as far as we know. That's just an interesting taste. I think very relevant to some of our topics on the podcast. So I recommend that essay as something, and maybe I would look also into some of the debates around the scientific side, around the actual theories of atomism, or maybe even the deeper history of that. But I really don't know. It depends on the nature of your paper. But anyway, so we can wrap up.
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like I recall ranting about David Lynch maybe in the last episode or two that we did about, I think I might have even specifically brought up his montage of the nuclear bombs with Threnody for the victims of Hiroshima. Yeah, just the most basic music selection of all time, like the most obvious, basic, like, look at me, look how sophisticated I am, kind of thing. I do think, sure, there is something interesting about tying whatever the phenomena in Twin Peaks is with basically that, the first nuclear bomb detonations like opened some kind of interdimensional portal that like maniacal jinn like Bob came through and have been terrorizing our world. Sure, that's an interesting idea. The really ultra spooky, because I think the very first atomic research did happen in Germany in the late 1930s, and so it did come from Nazi Germany, and it is chilling to think of like what the Nazis would have done if they had gotten those bombs first, because it would have maybe been the only thing that would have kept them from losing. Nothing else is going to stop the Red Army, but if they started doing that, who the hell knows? And with the kind of interests of people like Hitler and Himmler, being obsessed with like raising Tool or something again, I would not be super shocked if, they maybe dreamed of, building this like a Wunderweapon or whatever, that would open up like the portals and let like, I don't know, a bunch of Aryan jinn like come through or anything. I don't really know. I don't know if the Ahnenerbe was really like on that tip, but interesting concept. But the actual like execution, I kind of stopped watching the new Twin Peaks after that because it was just a little bit. It had been getting on my nerves up to that point, and it was just like, okay, you're gonna add this whole.
Well, like I said, I don't really even like the original Twin Peaks, so I couldn't get up the enthusiasm to start watching that. Maybe I will eventually, but I don't know.
Yeah, there was still like 13 hours left when when the nuclear bomb stuff happened, and it was like, okay, like maybe he goes out, maybe he builds on that theme or something, and they explore it more, but. I think his brain has just been turned to like sus mush by TM and like everybody just kissing his ass and like telling him how much of a genius he is, and he's just coasting and like that's pretty much my idea about that. I don't know really what we can really glean out of like David Lynch's if there's any wisdom to be gleaned rather from that connection. Maybe maybe he's a guy who has like some good instincts and stuff, but he's like so obsessed with like the instinctual and things that are like not thought out, but just like he's just drawn to them, you know, and he just like follows wherever his soul goes, you know, and it's just so weird, you know, like that whole thing. Okay, that's one approach to like making movies, but also it makes me roll my eyes a little bit.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's really not like that great of an insight. I mean, that's kind of like, you know, in all like UFO theories or whatever, it's always like, oh, you know, we detonated a nuclear bomb and that's why now these UFOs care about us, and that's why people see the aliens were watching us from space or whatever, and they saw this, you know. So it's kind of just a permutation of a very familiar thing. This was like a you know, huge inflection point in history where it became possible, you know, to like, you know, like as Derrida was talking about, you know, this imagination of this total war that would be infinite in some way and just would, you know, annihilate everything and would, you know, be even indescribable by the name war because it would destroy like, you know, civilization completely. But
it's like humanity, like finally attaining the powers of maybe not God himself, but like the powers of a god as we would have conceived them throughout most of human history. And we now had the idea, the power to exterminate ourselves, which is an awesome and terrifying power to have.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I was just going to mention, I remember listening to, you know, the official Temple of Set podcast, KPHR or whatever, you know, or KHPR, Kepper, you know, and Aquino, you know, did a guest spot on the podcast. Obviously, you know, you got to have him come on. And he said something like, you know, to blaspheme God, the purest act of blaspheming God would be to detonate an atomic bomb, you know, because God represents like, you know, the harmonious laws of nature and everything, you know, so splitting the atom and detonating the bomb, you know, that's like the purest act of blasphemy against God.
Wow.
So
that is interesting because I think he wrote his grad school thesis on the neutron bomb in like 1979.
Yeah.
So I'm sure he,
I mean, yeah, the standard theory around like the Nazis and nuclear weapons, I feel like, is, you know, that basically like by politicizing the education system and like staffing everything with like freaks like Heidegger or Konrad Lorenz who are like willing to go along with it, they like, you know, kind of did a massive brain drain to themselves, and like all the people who eventually were able to develop these weapons like left, like Albert Einstein and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but I don't know if there's maybe more to it than that, or
I don't know. I mean, J. Robert Oppenheimer, for all of his like sus quoting the Bhagavad Gita, was at least a fellow traveler of communists, and eventually got his security clearance revoked and like kicked out of academia in the 50s, even though he, and then he went to HUAC after that and named names of people he had worked with who were communists and stuff like that. But nobody really looked at it as like he was snitching because he had already had his career destroyed. So, and then he ended up working as like a high school physics teacher or something. So that's what happens if you're a communist. Once again, if you were a prominent communist in the 40s and you didn't like go before HUAC and say, please execute me, here are all my friends who are communists, then that would happen to you.
We mentioned in our recent Atlantis episode, Welteisler, like world ice theory, which was like kind of what they generally preferred over other forms of cosmology, like those that were, you know, eventually the kind of the basis for these ideas, like general relativity and all that stuff, like the Einstein, you know, the Copenhagen stuff, you know, which, you know, I find to be a little, you know, I'm more of a Bohemian myself, you know, or really, you know, whatever Ibn al-Arabi says, I think is probably right. But so they were operating from like Welteisler, so they couldn't like, you know, they would just develop Atlantean technology or whatever, you know, it wouldn't be the same.
That's what they wanted. So. That's what they wanted.
Yeah.
Well, good thing they didn't
because
get
the
it.
You know, the Einstein cosmology or the quantum mechanics, you know, that was Jewish, you know.
Jewish lies. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jewish. Yeah, right. Yeah. Unlike base world ice theory.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we can leave it there.
Yeah. This is a funny little quote. Heisenberg lectured his students about the theory of relativity proposed by the Jewish scientist Albert Einstein in an editorial. Himmler called Heisenberg a white Jew who should be made to disappear.
Wow. Okay. All right.
So,
on that note.
Well, but you know, it's good they did that, because otherwise then they might have had like nuclear scientists who could have created a horrible nuclear bomb. You know, not that it's good that these weapons exist at all, but
yeah,
you know,
yeah, exactly, exactly. They kind of provoked us into creating it. So, and then we actually went and used them. So,
and we hired them, to help us use them more. Yeah,
use them more, exactly.
Anyway,
get them faster over to Russia. Yeah. Okay. So that's
all right.
That's Q&A 6.
Yeah.
Good questions. Once again, thanks to the Grotto for.
Yep. Looking forward to another month. The unending jihad continues. Thinking next month, you know, we have some things in the docket. You know, I'm thinking maybe Dogman could happen.
Dogman could happen. Sure. I think we're ready for. I think Mothman was our last cryptid, so I think. I really don't know much about Dogman, so I'm curious to see what we turn up.
You're gonna learn,
and of course, our aforementioned Eagles deep dive is it's coming. It's coming. So Coen Brothers fans, be warned. It's going to be a rough one for you. Punk rockers, watch out. You know, deadheads. This is going to be a slightly upsetting episode. So
is this going to be like a 5-hour-long episode? Like, that's like, are we going to have to do this over 2 nights again? Is this going to be like a 7-hour thing? Like,
no. We'll keep it within reasonable bounds. I mean, we're really just talking about like a decade of musical dominance here. So nothing too crazy. I will have to insist that you watch like the 5-hour Eagles documentary series, though.
I will watch it. Yeah,
It'll
I'm
explain
not like
everything.
an expert on the Eagles, but
you're about to be.
Yeah, so maybe that will. Yeah, okay. I'm about to learn. I'll need to really brush up to.
Yeah, and we will probably read Don Felder's, autobiography where he dishes a lot of dirt about, after getting kicked out of the Eagles permanently. Don Fingersfelder, probably might be able to shed a different light because, the information, we're really like breaking into like, Fort Knox here in terms of like narrative control over the Eagles. Like, they, as famous as they are, they don't like unauthorized, like, I don't know. They don't like figured art about themselves being displayed anywhere, like, or their music being used. We'll see if we get like a DCMA request for daring to use their music in our episodes. Hopefully not.
That's another good hot take. Maybe Taylor Swift is like the Eagles of today. Maybe like in retrospect, it's easy to defend like the Eagles, but sometimes you can really go out on a limb. She's popular. She's
I want you to keep that in mind as you watch 6 hours of Eagles action. That
Eagles
maybe
content,
I think there might be a through line to some stuff you care about very deeply in today's musical scene. Some people that are unfairly maligned and persecuted despite their excellent songwriting skills.
Their general wild popularity, people say that they are shallow, but in fact,
haters gonna hate.
Exactly.
That's just what they're gonna do.
Right.
Yeah, you just gotta shake it off and take it easy. Shake it off.
All right, so look forward to that.
And hopefully maybe another guest or two.
Might some more guests in the pipe.
Okay. That'll be it for now, and until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? Can't you feel the fears I'm feeling today? If the button is pushed, there's no running away. There'll be no one to save with the world in a grave. Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. So mad, feels like coagulating. I'm sitting here just contemplating. I can't twist the truth, it knows no regulation. Handful of senators don't pass legislation, and marches alone can't bring integration. When human respect is disintegrating, this whole crazy world is just too frustrating. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Think of all the hate there is in Red China, then take a look around to Selma, Alabama. You may leave here for 4 days in space, but when you're